Good to see you all. Welcome to the 2022 Tribal Projects Meeting and Showcase. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes before we kick off our 3-day meeting. We haven't had a meeting like this since, I thought it was 2022, then I looked, it was actually 2021, and everything that's virtual is now blending together. So it's good to see you all and have you all in one spot again. I'm sorry we're not in person. Good morning. I know we have a nice mix of not only our tribal projects and tribal grantees, but I know we also have our other partners and new friends here. So my name is Hannah Deloise. Some of you may recognize me, but if you don't, I'm from the California Tobacco Control Program. I'm one of the program consultants and our lead for the American Indian Initiative and funding. You'll be hearing a lot from me and my team today on day one. But to get us started, I want to hand it over to Ravina and the Tribal Community Coordinating Center to help kick us off this morning.
Good morning. So nice to see all of you. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Ravina Sokno. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a member of the Enterprise Rancheria Maidu tribe in Northern California. I'm the project coordinator for the Tribal Community Coordinating Center, or TCCC. We're the statewide coordinating center providing technical assistance and support to 12 California tribes and 5 tribal serving organizations as they lead the fight against commercial tobacco-related harm within their respective communities. We want to start the day with an acknowledgement for California's first people. This is a virtual event, and we know you're joining us from all over the state. So we're going to acknowledge the 109 federally recognized sovereign nations that still live, work, and play in this state, and recognize that they are still here. We also want to honor the many others, past and present, that inhabited these lands long before the prospectors and settlers arrived and disrupted their way of life. We acknowledge the ongoing efforts to reclaim traditional cultures and values while healing from generations of trauma as a result of violence, marginalization, and intentional exclusion. We acknowledge the strength and resilience of California's first inhabitants and their descendants, and we recognize their right to self-determination as they seek to build a brighter future. I'm joining you this evening from the Los Angeles area, or this morning from the Los Angeles area, the traditional homelands of the Tongva people and my father's tribe. I'm grateful to them for caring for this land for thousands of years so that I may call this place my home. I strongly encourage all of you to learn about your local history and let it inspire you to take some type of meaningful action, whatever that means for you. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the presentations today and come back to join us for day 2 tomorrow to learn more about the tribal projects and enjoy the presentations that they have prepared. Now I would like to introduce James Trujillo from the La Jolla Band of Luiseno Indians. He serves as a cultural advisor to his tribe and joins us this morning to offer a blessing.
Morning, everybody. Me, yung paloba mo acting. Natong James Trujillo yaka, non La Jolla ngay. Hello, everybody. My name is James Trujillo, and I'm from La Jolla. And just want to offer up a prayer this morning for our meeting. Lovaka. Ivi pachamatacham chamek iva achananik. Cham tetilapi, cham ngoyakpi, cham shokakpi, cham makilawachi. Cham lachipi, cham makilawish, po lovi akpi, po ayalakpi champe chamana. Pi cho onam ayalanek kalan. Kalan ayalanek tetilan. Iwi omtach ayalanek tro onam. Kaita omtach shalachman. He echman. Ich ivik woltuman. Hishkai. Yawak cho on loviman. Ayalanek hati an pochoon. Pi cham yung wichi chami tomana. Kwa vichuk chami. Tok cho on hish mi chat an kachi. Alach wichi hish cham locha kala. Pi ponehelek puyamangay. Pi awoy wanay tilaan. We Bahay tela. Pi pochuchilak pi. Mik pi ivi champoyamang. Amoli pi mik choonam. Pi saponga yonacham choonam ayalanek polovita. Pa choon hi cha ayalanek omechatian. Poeka. What I said this morning was just praying for everybody that everything is well, and that as we all come together, the ones that are always being vigilant and looking out for one another and praying for each other, for not only for ourselves, but for everything that lies ahead, that our future may be bright and that we'll always know the right way to go, and that we always speak good of one another and we look after ourselves in a good way, and that we don't fight with each other, don't have anger towards one another for any reason, and that if we do these things, that everything will turn out in a good way, and that the one above us watches out for us and takes care of us, sees everything that we do, everything that we partake in on this earth, and that everything that if you pray and you ask for guidance, that you know will always be guided in the right way, and that these things were always to remember, and that everybody gathered together today in this one place, you know, we're online now, but with good intentions, and that by doing so, everything, all of our concerns will turn out favorably. Poeka. Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, James, for that beautiful blessing and opening for us today. Really sets the tone and for the next 3 days that we're going to spend together. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. If you haven't already, introduce yourself in the chat. It's also helpful for us to keep track of who's here, just to make sure that any resources or anything we share, we make sure we get them out to you. So if you haven't, your name, where you're from, and your role would be super helpful. I introduced myself already, but I think I'm going to get started with today. I have a little bit of an icebreaker because we're not in person and we can't do those type of things. So in the chat, name one thing that you're looking forward to as we move into the fall holiday season. So we may all celebrate different holidays, but as we move towards the end of the year, what is one thing you're looking forward to? And mine is not pumpkin spice lattes, so that's yours. That's okay. I'm here for the peppermint drinks at Christmas, so. There's a lot of, I don't want to melt in the heat anymore. Family time. We have a lot of things to look forward to. I know the end of the year gets busy. So then my next question for all of you, oh, hilarious, dressing your cat up as a crocodile. I love it. Okay. Next question is, what is one thing you can't live without? I feel like we kind of did this at a meeting with TCCC, or I think, Ravina, you said toothpaste, or what was one thing you couldn't live without? It was like toothpaste or shampoo. So what's one thing you really can't live without? And I'm not making you pick between two hard things. It's so fun to see what people put. We're either so literal and say sleep, or we say something else. All right, and my last question, name one thing you're grateful for. Perfect. Thank you for participating. Awesome to learn a little bit more about each of you as we start our day. So we're going to start with a little bit of context. Feel free to use the chat to message one another or continue the discussion as we move along. But I want to kind of frame contextually where we started, where we currently are, and where we're headed from an initiative standpoint. So if you have questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat. And I think either TCCC or someone on my team will keep track of those so I can address those at the end. And we have plenty of time. So the first thing that I want to cover is just providing some background, because I know we have not only tribal grantees in the room, there's also new project staff, but we also have some other tobacco control partners in the room who may not be as familiar with this particular initiative. So the American Indian Initiative was CTCP's initiative to fund tribal governments and tribal serving organizations. Really, the goal when we released this funding was to improve the health of California's tribal communities. And as many of you know, this was our first time doing this. And so we had to form tribal consultations. My team and I traveled around the state to try to talk to different tribes, talk to different communities to figure out really what was going to work. I think we've still learned a lot since then, which I'll cover some of those things, but that was kind of the process. We listened to some key stakeholders to figure out how to go about doing this. But as I mentioned, it's definitely been a continual learning process for us as a state program. But that is the context for this particular funding stream, where all of you are funded under that particular one. That was the American Indian Initiative to reduce tobacco-related disparities. And so some of the initiative goals that we had put together after listening to folks and traveling across the state was that the number one goal that we needed to focus on, which we're still working on today, was building capacity and skills among tribal members and the staff employed by tribal governments to really work on tobacco use prevention and reduction interventions, health education services, and some of that community work. So capacity building was one. And then mobilizing and engaging community residents and tribal government organizations to support tobacco use prevention and reduction policy and system changes. So those were our top two. And then the third one that came about from our listening sessions and our consultations was we also really needed to focus on evaluation. So implementing, supporting, and evaluating tribal project policy and system change campaigns, because this was the first time we were doing this. Regarding commercial tobacco use and all of this work that we're doing. So all of you, as part of your work plans, have evaluation, but we also have statewide evaluation to really take a look at how we're doing with this funding, to see if there's any changes we need to make. But you'll be hearing a little bit later from our statewide evaluator on an update on how that's going. And so this was basically, in a nutshell, kind of the first time that we had funded tribes directly and worked with tribal communities in this capacity. You guys are all the trailblazers, and I do acknowledge that we have and still are learning a lot about how best to work with you and California's tribal communities. And as I mentioned, you'll be hearing after my little talk here from UCSD, who was our statewide evaluator, who many of you have been working with either in focus groups or key informant interviews that'll help to anonymously inform us on how to move forward with future endeavors. So I pulled this slide. This was an older one that I had just for context, because I know we have new friends in the room. So we started back in 2019. So we're a few years into this initiative. We had multiple waves of funding. Some projects are just in the middle of their grant period right now, and others are a bit further along. So many of you are on different timelines because that funding was released in various waves. but I wanted to just show you what timelines we were working on for this first round of funding, which all of them were 5-year contracts. But we'll talk a little bit later on things that should and will happen towards the end of your grant period. But I just wanted to paint this general picture on the timeline for all of you, especially since some of you may have not worked with some of our tribal grantees yet. And then I think later today we'll be going over some other resources and websites to keep track of stuff, but I just wanted to point out that this is a screenshot of TC4. This is where you can find all the materials related to your grant procurement, as well as check for upcoming funding opportunities that we release. If you are a funded tribal grantee right now, and you're looking for your original request for applications, likely because you didn't apply or you're the new staff and you're taking over, you'll be looking under the archive tab to find that guiding contract document. But if there are new funding opportunities, those will be on here, and I think we'll go over this later. And like I mentioned, this was the first time that CTCP was doing this. So this is a map that you can access on the Tribal Community Coordinating website that they had put together. So I lifted that from there. We funded 13 tribes and 5 tribal serving organizations around the state. There's still a lot of places that we want to be able to reach and to fund, but this is a general map to give you an idea of where folks landed from this funding stream. We're all the way up in Del Norte and Humboldt County, and all the way down to San Diego. And some of the work being done by our tribal grantees and tribal partners, all of you overwhelmingly, and I wasn't surprised, picked youth coalitions. So I love seeing all the wonderful work you're engaged in, but for our new friends in the room, youth coalitions really was a very important component for our tribal grantees. Smoke-free households was also a good, important one. Smoke-free indoor workplaces, tobacco product waste and litter. And I feel like this one is picking up a little bit more speed. And I think we're going to hear from someone tomorrow who's been working on some of that, but also tobacco cessation and healthcare systems. There's a few working on excise taxes, smoke-free outdoor areas, and smoke-free gaming. So there's a good mix of things that our grantees are working on. So I wanted to share that with you to give you some framework for what's to come. I'm really excited for tomorrow for day 2. There's just a lot that's taking place. Many of you are over halfway through your grant, and a lot of stuff has taken place already. You've had a lot of successes. So that was just a little snapshot. And the coordinating center can get mad at me, but I took another thing from your website. I wanted to point out for everyone who's on day 1 with us today, current tribal priorities that came about from their policy platform. If you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and go to their website. I highly recommend it. It's very helpful understanding. Thanks, Nazba. The current tribal priorities that I wanted to point out is, and this is things that CTCP has learned and also shared with our local lead agencies who may be interested in working with the tribes in their area, is respecting the sovereignty of tribal nations. That's definitely the first one. And then align with community priorities, including traditional tobacco practices. I heard a lot about this in the over the past few weeks, not only at T-Rock meetings, but also at the recent Health Equity Summit. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. And then investing time and resources in community outreach and relationship building. Adopting culturally relevant messaging and strategies, which we'll talk a little bit more this afternoon about community engagement. Addressing historical trauma and holistic health. Leveraging of both youth and elder leadership. And valuing Native knowledge, Native voices, Native insights and experiences. So the policy platform goes into a lot more depth, but for a snapshot, this is kind of where we're headed, the things that are current tribal priorities. moving forward. Okay. So where are we headed? I wanted to point out that CTCP is committed to continuing work in tribal communities. We really want to continue our work to decolonize tobacco, reduce commercial tobacco-related disparities, but also just continue to move forward and holistically improve the health of our communities. You're probably also wondering why I went a little in depth in the beginning about the formation of our initiatives and funding tribes and tribal serving organizations. I've been fielding a lot of questions and having a lot of one-on-ones with many of you, and I heard it at the recent Health Equity Summit, so I wanted to address this here. We at CTCP are committed, and I'm committed personally, on continuing the work that all of you are engaged in. Understandably, because we do work in the realm of grant funding, that's competitive, that does have expiration dates, and I heard these questions at the Health Equity Summit, things like, what do I do when my grant funding runs out and I'm done in 2 years? There are plans. We are committed to continuing the work in your communities. So I just wanted to point that out. There are plans in place for future funding. A lot of that still has to get ironed out, but it's not forgotten. We do want to help you continue the work you're doing and hopefully add in some new tribal partners and some new tribal grantees into the mix to help expand our reach. So all of that will be announced on TC4 and on partners, which we'll cover a little bit later for the website. So really make sure you're signed up for those listservs. And I know that CTCP is not perfect, so we've learned a lot. We're moving forward. This is why participating in the evaluation statewide is really helpful for us to help continue moving forward and informing our next approaches. Okay, after I get through some of this stuff, I promise I won't be the only one sharing and talking. But I pivoted a little bit in this beginning because there were a lot of common questions and feedback that I was getting, and I wanted to address some of those. If there are more, you can share those. But I'm going to pivot a little bit. I know initially I was planning on covering some more of a general overview and context, but I want to be cognizant of what many of you have asked me to talk about, which is some of the items you see on the screen here. But before I get to those, if you are comfortable, you can place in the chat box or email it to me.
Morning.
Or give it to the Tribal Coordinating Center to anonymously let me know how CTCP can continue to improve and pivot to better support the work that all of you are doing in tribal communities. This can be things like specific types of training addressing capacity building for staff, what you'd like to see in future opportunities to support your work being successful. I heard in my breakouts at the Health Equity Summit a lot about education and traditional and ceremonial tobacco. So I'm looking for other things that are tangible ways that we can help reasonably support your current work and continue that. We're in it for the long haul, so I want to be cognizant and responding and listening to all of you, which is why I'm pivoting a little bit with this slide. So if you're comfortable, I will leave that there for you to think about. But some of the things we're going to address today is heavier focus on capacity building, particularly because a lot of staff are new to public health, they're new to state grants. There were asks around tracking measures, timeline forecasting, so I'll cover the timeline stuff shortly. Traditional tobacco education and supporting efforts to reclaim culture. I think it's either tomorrow or the day after we're hearing from Corinne Pierce, who will be talking about traditional tobacco. She was at our last tribal projects meeting in 2021. So hopefully that will be helpful. And then I have been hearing this from a lot of folks, is how we can better support our non-tribal CTCP funded partners to help engage with our tribal grantees. They want to work with many of you, and so They just need a little bit, they want to be a little bit more involved in the mix and understand how to respectfully work with tribal communities as partners. So today, that's why I mentioned we have a lot of new friends on the call. They're really interested in seeing on day 1 and day 2, everything that's going on in tribal communities. And then cessation education and support, which I'll cover a little bit briefly about some things and some discussions we're having at the state level to help all of you. And then I'll cover diversifying funding for tobacco work and how to think about that longevity of your public health programs. And at the end, don't leave early, there is a helpful budget section. So if you have budget questions, we're going to go over some ways to creatively support your scope of work activities. Okay, so I'm going to go back to basics a little bit, but I know that's what folks had asked me to do. The building blocks are important to have as a solid foundation as we build up our work. And so the scope of work, many of you did not write your work plans. So you picked it up and it's your blueprint. It's your guide to the work you're doing under the grant. Your objectives are those big shoot for the stars goals. And under those you have activities that are either intervention activities such as educating tribal council or evaluation. So which is your program evaluation to help inform your work, assess the issue, and that kind of stuff. But your activities are what matter as far as completion goes and tracking measures. So if there's a tracking measure specified under that activity, that's the expectation for the grant. Many of you are halfway or more through your grant. Now is a great time to spend some time strategizing what the next year to 2 years will look like. And we'll cover some timeline forecasting in the next slide, but that's really where timeline mapping and activity plans come in. So I recommend, y'all just finished your progress reports, but I recommend in the next month or two, before your next one's due, you can spend some time identifying those activities that are completed in your plan, which are in progress and which are yet to begin. With that list, you can plot those on a timeline to ensure you'll hit those activity goals. It'll also help point out if you need to pivot a little bit. But the big thing is that that'll help you identify if you have the right work in place that'll help your program achieve that goal, that policy, or even with your youth coalition objective. All of this lives in Otis, which is our personal grant management and reporting software, which is where you do your progress reports, which we'll cover later today, because I know some folks had asked things like, where do I find the policy manual and other things. So as far as timeline forecasting and strategizing, this is a really simplified example, but a lot of folks had asked me to just visualize this. Your own timeline forecasting and strategizing would look like a larger roadmap, but this is just to give you an idea. So in my hypothetical example, let's say you're working on implementing a policy that has been adopted by tribal council. So you're in that implementation phase. So what steps would be included in implementation and when would they need to happen? That's when planning it out on a timeline is really helpful. So each of these bubbles that I have on the screen, they would correlate with one of your activities in your work plan. For this hypothetical situation, I've included your activities that are in this example scope of work, but I've also included the date of when this action will take place. So this will help you kind of organize everything and understand kind of where you're at. But doing this with your remaining activities you have to complete, or to help you strategize how you'll reach your identified success for that objective, can come in really handy at understanding the big picture, help you figure out what your short-term goals are, intermediate goals, and long-term goals. But as we move into the holiday season, which is kind of why I asked that holiday question, it allows you to map out around the busy times, because I know that in a lot of your communities, when we get towards the holidays, a lot of things shut down, a lot of things are closed. It really helps you plan out how things are going to go. I know I'm covering basic stuff. If you have questions, feel free to stop me. It's so weird being virtual. It's like I'm talking all by myself. Okay. Grant management and organizational skills and facilitation and community engagement skills when engaging in your work. This is something that I wanted to help some of you think through because I get a lot of questions. Is that one thing, we'll cover community engagement a bit later today, but one thing I hear a lot about is about building staff capacity. So thinking about, are there any available virtual trainings for project staff that would help build applicable skills towards your scope of work? One example is a project who does a lot of facilitation. They may facilitate a lot of meetings, a lot of strategy charts, all that kind of stuff. They need facilitator training for their project staff. That is something that I have had projects in the past identify that they need to allocate some of their budget to sending staff to that virtual training to help build those skills. Those are things that are allowable, but you will have to request a budget revision. We would approve that training, and then you would be able to help build the capacity of your staff. So thinking about, are there any available virtual trainings that can help build your capacity, help move your work forward, and educate your project staff is something that is worth doing if you're thinking about some of these things that you need to accomplish. And then, are there any specific asks or gaps in knowledge or things that myself, Coordinating Center, CTCP, or another one of our funded statewide can address to help build those staff members' skills? I know we're all busy, but we're also all funded for a reason. I encourage you to think about this. I know there's oftentimes a lot of new staff, or you find that your work has evolved and new skills need to be honed. Getting creative and really thinking about what type of training your staff need, where can you get that training? Those are things that would play into the capacity building component. And back in 2021, when we had our first tribal projects meeting, we touched a little bit upon traditional versus commercial tobacco with one of our guest speakers, who I mentioned is back for this one. But I wanted to bring this up because many of my work groups that I'm on are really honing in on this and traditional tobacco education, decolonizing commercial tobacco, reclaiming those cultures and traditions. And I've been hearing a lot about how that's really important in engaging your youth for that approach. But that's all stuff that has been strongly highlighted in your work. It's things that CTCP needs to think about moving forward with future opportunities. But I wanted to encourage you to keep going down this path of really reclaiming culture, tying these things into perhaps your youth coalition work. I think I heard from one of my projects that they took their youth coalition on a field trip to visit a traditional tobacco where they grew it for the tribe. And so thinking about, are there great ways to tie things back to your community if traditional tobacco is appropriate and applicable? I know that there is some education in our communities that needs to be done around this. I have heard that not everybody understands the difference between the two, but there is great interest in engaging our communities in this dialogue. So just wanted to acknowledge that we have heard that, we are moving forward with it, and we encourage you to incorporate that into your community education, reclaiming culture. And I learned from all of you, so that's good too. And I also heard feedback about cessation resources and learning how to tailor cessation resources and integrate those into your programs, such as employee wellness, and other avenues for your community members. And I know that where you are in your stages of work, this is becoming really important. Many of you are moving into policy implementation. or you're kind of past the initial stages of your project to where the cessation resources and cessation engagement with your community really matters. So as California's Quit Line, we have Kick It California, and I think they're on this meeting today. I think I saw them, but we had a recent meeting, and I know that they're willing to work with you and learn and figure out the best way to help move some of these cessation components forward. So there are some plans and some discussions on how to tailor things specifically to tribal communities, but I know personally that they're very willing to hear from you and work with you, particularly as you're moving into implementation and are trying to figure out some of the best ways forward with cessation. You also have the option of adding to updating your existing educational materials, cessation resources to reflect your community. I think I've seen some wrap cards that folks have done that has Kick It's information, and it also has the National American Indian Quit Line and some other more local community focused cessation resources. So updating, adding to, or creating your own educational materials is another way that you can help tailor cessation components. And the last one is a bit of a unique approach, but one that we are interested in could be to build partnerships and create those cessation champions in your community. If you're actively working on a cessation or a similar objective, is there a way you can creatively utilize the grant to train community leaders, tribal health providers in cessation? Traditionally, this may have looked like something we call tobacco treatment specialists, which is a pretty involved training and certification process. If that's something you're interested in doing and you're working specifically on cessation, you can reach out to your PC or myself, and we can help figure out how to work that in or talk to you a little bit more about it. But sometimes cessation takes training individuals in your local community to really make an impact, and we get that. I know some of you are also utilizing native cessation curriculum, so that's an option as well. But I just wanted to let you know that this is some of the ways that you can think about cessation and some of the things that we're trying to do on the state level to help address some of those questions. Okay, so supporting policy work in your communities. I know you're going to probably hear a bit more about policy work from presenters tomorrow, but as a general overview, there have been questions about further support with policy work in your community, particularly in the stages where leaders are finalizing new policy and then with subsequent implementation. Your policy-based objectives they're broken down either by adoption and implementation, or adoption only, very rarely implementation only, but your scope of work and your plan specifies that. Generally, most of your policy objectives fall under adoption and implementation in your work plans. And this is where that timeline mapping that I mentioned earlier comes in handy. What general steps do you need to take before policy adoption and then after, once that policy is implemented? And one of the last things I wanted to address was diversifying funding streams and longevity of your tobacco programs. I touched upon this a little bit earlier, but as I mentioned, as a state program, we're committed to continuing the American Indian Initiative. And I understand the need to continue this work, bring new partners to the table. And that being said, I heard so many good conversations over many meetings over the last few months about where folks talked about diversifying their funding streams, wondering how do I do that and how to ensure the longevity of their programs, because they're really servicing and supporting their communities, which is really why they're in this work, which is what I heard. So when we think about unique ways to sustain your programs, we want people to stop, smoking commercial tobacco products, which means that, state taxes will go down for that. And public health has historically been underfunded, right? So thinking about other unique ways to sustain your programs. It could be excise tax revenue, general revenue set aside by tribal council, which I know is a big ask, but it is an example. The point being that we need to get creative in pursuing our end goals. You can think about signing up for national listservs, checking other places that may have funding that you can supplement your CTCP grant with. I know I've seen tribes in other states do that. They may get a state grant and they may also get a CDC one to work on tobacco prevention. In the world of grant funding, I feel like we're always doing applications. So thinking about other ways to supplement your tobacco funding. And so I'm going to be done talking after this slide, but just some brief updates. We are strategizing our training offerings through 2023. So if there are any asks or wishes, you can pass those along or put them in the section in your next progress report. We are always trying to figure out best ways to support you. And then make sure that you check all of the updates on partners, which will show you some parts of the site later, but just making sure that that's where a lot of this stuff gets posted. And then we are working on planning upcoming tribal funding opportunities. Stuff is in the works. I can't say much more yet, but that is just for long-term planning, which I mentioned is our commitment to this initiative. And then we're working internally and with stakeholders and having conversations. Some of you were at the recent Health Equity Summit on things like the Health Equity Plan, TROC to include items such as traditional tobacco and address a lot of that current feedback that I went over. So I wanted to give you just an update of kind of where we're at the state. I do my best to hear all of you. So if there's other feedback that I need to receive, I am all ears. I am open ears and willing to learn and listen. But otherwise, keep up the amazing work. I can't wait to hear about what all of y'all have been up to. Thank you for being on this journey to make your communities a better place. That is all I have. So if you have questions, chat box, or if you want to come off mute, I think that's okay.
Thank you, Anna.
Cool, I feel like I talked enough. You heard me enough. All righty. Checking how we're doing on time here, because I'm a little ahead of schedule. So I think Chegg is on. There's Chegg. I'm a little ahead of schedule, so unless folks want to talk about something else, I can also hand it to you.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah, for such a great introduction. And I really appreciate how well you and your team structure our online meetings. It's, you know, I feel like we're all professionals now with the Zoom meeting, the online, and but I very much feel like connected in your meetings. So I appreciate that. Since we have a quick couple minutes, so my name is Chegg Lowry. I'm with the UC San Diego Katie evaluation team. And there are a couple of my fellow team members who are here, Gina Mish and Andrew Sarkin, and I believe Corinne Berryman, and Dr. Wael Aldalami is with us too. But when I present and show my PowerPoint here in a minute, it'll be primarily me, but in case anyone has a question that I cannot answer, I don't hesitate to throw it to my awesome coworkers. So a little bit about myself. I am of Yurok ancestry. On my, I'm of Yurok ancestry on my mom's side from the North Coast. I don't know how many of you have been to Redwood Country. Show me your hands if you have. Okay. And I know there are a couple of folks, Wendy and Lale, who are from there. And then on my dad's side, I am a mountain Maidu. So Maidu, there are three groups of Maidu, and my family is from the mountains. And then I am of Achimawi ancestry, also known as Pit River. So high desert, way up, neighbors to the Modoc community. And I've had the privilege of working with UCSD, our team, for about 1.5 years now. And it's a great privilege to partner with so many great Native nations and communities and families. And today is significant for me. In my off time, I've done a lot of work with Native veterans, California Native veterans, and their families. And today, September 27, is significant because in 1918, on September 26, 1918, during World War I, the United States launched the Army's largest ever offensive battle in Army history. And among those soldiers, this was in the Meuse-Argonne. It's called the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. And among the soldiers there in that battle were quite a few California Native men from around the state. And I had two great uncles who fought and served in the army there in France. And both fortunately were able to return home. They survived. But I mentioned that and how it's correlated to our work in terms of tobacco cessation and use is I have photographs of one of the great uncles. His name was Walter McCovey Sr. The McCovey family is a big family up on the coast. I'm related to all the McCoveys. So Walter, before we had pictures of him before he went into the service in 1918 and before he went into combat. And then I have a couple of pictures of him after, many decades later. He was older. But in the pictures of him after, he's always holding a cigarette. And I often think about that. I know my grandfather on my dad's side fought in World War II, and he learned to smoke in the military, in the service. And so for many families, that service, that sacrifice, a lot of the men, and now we have a lot of Native women who've been in the service. A lot of them pick up smoking. That's where it comes from. So I wanted to share that because this is the anniversary of that, the start of that battle. So the end of September, October, and then the war ended in November 11, 1918. So that battle occurred almost to the end of, so almost 3 months. So California Native men were in that, and then they came home with all of that trauma and all of that undiagnosed post-traumatic stress. And, they were just told, there were no services. So smoking was one of the ways where they were masking things. They weren't coping, right? They were masking emotions and trauma and needing to heal. And so I very much appreciate the work that we are doing now, because that wasn't too long ago for our families, right? On top of all the other historical challenges that our Native people have, which directly correlates to capacity, right? The capacity in all of our communities and in all of our families to do this very important and often challenging work, health. So thank you very much for every one of you for your efforts and your good, honorable work. And if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Go for it.
And jump into the PowerPoint. And while I'm doing that, if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And Hannah, if you'd be kind enough, maybe at the end of each slide, if there are questions on that slide, we can, so that I'm not the only one talking. Although I enjoy
Sure.
talking, I can tell lots of good stories too. But so this is our great team right here, and you'll see that there are a couple of open spots. We're working to get a new intern that is part of our program, and a new research assistant. But these are the good people that I have the privilege of working with and learning with. We have an advisory committee that we convene with at least 2 times a year. And if there are any individual questions, or sometimes I will or our team will email one of these great folks. So I'm not going to read their bios. I'm just going to let you guys read them, but we very much appreciate the good work that each of these individuals is giving toward our project. Here are the next 3. So we have 6 advisors, all very knowledgeable, very kind, and give us good advice, critical analysis when we meet, encouragement. So these are folks that help us in our efforts. I know there are a lot of new staff and new directors and coordinators, and that's always a great thing. It's always also a little bit of a challenge, honestly, so some of this might seem very simplistic and repetitive, but we designed it with the intent that, maybe it's someone that's brand new. This is your first Zoom meeting with all of us right here and now. So this is the partnership process. And we're always very keen on calling it a partnership with Native nations, right? There is, a historical trauma attached to the concept of outside institutions evaluating or assessing Native nations or Native efforts, especially in health. And so, as a way of decolonizing that, as a way of looking at a strength-based approach where we are constantly learning, it's always a partnership. So my role in this work is I do outreach to the project directors and coordinators, and they provide us a list of key informants so that we can interview them. Then we contact these folks, these individuals. It's usually between 4 and 5 folks who we interview. And then we also have online surveys that we ask. And that's usually a little more, a higher number, 7, 8, 9 surveys. All of it is confidential. So after the project director or coordinator connects us with these folks, we set up Zoom calls. We conduct the interview, and everything is transcribed and coded. And this project was funded at the same time as the first set of projects, correct? So it's on the initial 5-year cycle. So that's how long our effort will last too. So there are 3 waves, basically. The baseline interviews and baseline surveys have been completed. And you'll see there 57 interviews and 86 online surveys. How many of you have interviewed 57 people? Raise your hands. I've never interviewed 57 people, but our team has done that. And I'm always amazed at the generosity, of community members. And sometimes we interview project staff as well. We realize that, with everything that's been going on, especially with the pandemic, it's been a challenge, right? To connect and meet with people. So we're very happy that our baseline is completed. And we are now entering the second phase. And we've just now started with some interviews and surveys. The goal is to interview the same folks. So the same folks that were interviewed and that gave online surveys in the baseline, we want to reconnect with them for the second interview and survey, and then in the final interview and survey. The goal has been to reconnect with folks after about a year or a year and a half. Timelines kind of went out the window when the pandemic hit, right? So we very much appreciate everybody's patience and willingness, to connect with us. And this is a built-in part of each project. This is not something that's extra. This is very necessary work because we are evaluating the state's efforts. So our project, we're not evaluating the individual tribes or tribal serving organizations. We are evaluating this overall state effort. Any questions so far? Please just put them in the chat. A big part of our project is to conduct focus groups. And again, because of the pandemic, things were shifted around. But if you'll see there in the center, the goal is to conduct all the focus groups in 2023. So I will be reaching out to potential tribes who could maybe help host some of these or clinics. We are working with our advisors to finalize the content of the focus groups. Multiple projects will be invited to attend together. So if I'm up in Pomo country, I know there's a lot of Pomo nations that could get together. If I'm up in United Indian Health Services up on the coast, down here in Kumeyaay ancestral lands. So we will hopefully get together and attend these together. One set of focus groups will include just project staff. And one set of focus groups will include only community members. Okay. So again, that'll be coming along rather soon because 2023, hard to believe, is basically almost here. So you might be asking yourself, okay, so what's Katie going to provide? What's the tangible, what's the end product here, Chag? So a big part of it is a final report that combines the aggregated data. So that's all the combined information, and my coworkers are amazing at that. And we will provide that to the CDPH and CTCP. These three categories are some of the larger goals that will be looked at. And if there are any questions on this, please let me know, or send it through Hannah or NASPA at TCCC. Really appreciate our partners, our partner organizations. So this is part of the final goal. And if you have ideas about how we can best provide this information, because often a report is great, but that might only go to certain folks. If there's a time and a place where it's appropriate for any of our staff to, at the end, attend sessions or conference, or verbally share or take questions, I've learned that is a meaningful part of partnering with Native nations, that reports sometimes can go only to some people, and we recognize that we have all of these community partnerships. So here's the big one. I hope everybody will screenshot this. Does everybody know how to screenshot? Raise your hand. Can you see? Okay. All right. Some of you didn't raise your hand. So hopefully you will remember this then. So this is our approximate timeline order for the next 2 waves. So you'll see at the very top where it says the first follow-up surveys and interviews. So that's the second wave that we've begun. Okay, and we're working with La Jolla, have been in contact with Paula and San Pasqual. We're going to be reaching out to those folks. And then you'll see the middle group, and then on the right. And this is basically an approximation to how projects were funded, and basically an approximation to the capacity of how the projects filled out staff, and doing our best. This isn't like set in stone, but this is where we will be reaching out to. So you'll be hearing from me. So if you represent any of these, if you're the director or the coordinator, and you had any questions about, when's Katie going to get in touch with us? Here's what it is. So you'll see the second wave, we're hoping to finish that, before August 2023. I mean, that's the goal. So always be mindful of your people's timing. I remember my grandmother always said that. And I remember she would say that when we would be sitting together at a brush dance ceremony on my Yurok side. And I always, try to incorporate that in the work that I have the privilege of doing with Native nations. Like, timing is very important, cultural timing. And yes, the pandemic has really shifted things and impacted us in ways that are often unique, right? Because, COVID has hit Native communities in a different way, and it's still here, right? So we are always mindful of that with our outreach. And when I call and ask, can we set up these interviews? Can we get this information? Can we get this project, keep it rolling? But then always there's the balance of, we do have defined target dates. We do have defined grant cycles. So we are very much appreciative of all of you directors and coordinators and staff that help connect us to your communities for the Katie work. And as soon as we can get the interviews and surveys completed, that's great. So you'll be hearing from me. And again, any questions or concerns, feel free to let me know. And I think that's pretty much it for the PowerPoint. Are there any?
I don't know if there's any questions. Samuel knows how to take the screenshot, so he put that in the chat. Thank you. I think one thing that came up from previous conversations I had heard from this group was in terms of when you were talking about the report and disseminating back to the community, there were a lot of asks, I think, at the Health Equity Summit for things that were visual, just to help their community members understand. So that was one thing that came up, along with, you know, verbally sharing, but wanted to bring that up. And then while we have some time, not to put you on the spot, Bio, but I want you to introduce yourself because you work very closely with CHAG.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, everyone. My name is Bayo Akitunde. I am a research scientist here at the California Tobacco Control Program. I'm also the evaluation sort of specialist for the American Indian Initiative. So I've been working very closely with CHAG and Dr. Waila Dilami, who is currently the principal investigator for the evaluation of American Indian Initiative. So that's been my role here at CTCP. Over the years, we've actually developed so many materials, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have specific evaluation questions, particularly when it comes to statewide evaluation. You can reach out to myself or to CHAG, and we'll be very happy to answer any questions you have regarding if it's either the timeline or it's also just general question about evaluation. That's been part of my training here at CTCP, and I'm always happy and available to answer any of your questions regarding that. Last year, when we had this event, we shared, or we had sort of like a flyer that answers questions about the differences between statewide evaluation and some of your individual evaluation. We still have that flyer. If you need a copy, I'm happy to share that with you all. But that's also one of the materials that we've shared out in the past. We have another material that speaks about some of the frequently asked questions you might have about evaluation and evaluation work. So we can also share that with you all. So I'm happy to share. I'm always happy to listen to some of your concerns about the evaluation, whether it's going well, if it's going well in your community, if it's not going well. Those are all the important feedback that we need, so that ultimately at the end of the day, we do want to showcase the strengths within your community, the things that have actually worked within your community, and also for our communities to also understand that, yes, you know, this is where what we've been able to accomplish in the last 5 years that our program has been funded. Again, I know we don't have the magic wand to make things disappear or to eliminate tobacco-related diseases from our community. But I do hope that at the end of the day, we can say that we've been able to move the needle, you know, and we've been able to advance tobacco, commercial tobacco, or eliminate some, if not all, tobacco-related diseases, you know, in our community, and also to advance tobacco control projects in our community. So that's been our ultimate goal. We know we cannot solve it all, we cannot solve all the problem, but to, you know, a very large extent, we do hope that we would have been able to move the needle in the right direction in our various community, and that's that will be our joy at the end of the day. So please feel free to reach out to me anytime, or to CHAG. We work very closely together, and I'm really excited to be seeing some of the future work that will be going on within your community. So thank you.
Thank you, Bayo. And I did ask Samuel to send out a poll regarding your advice and directives for our focus groups. Our team is wondering about having virtual or in person. So when Samuel sends out the poll, if you could kindly look at those options and answer them, that will help guide us for when we have the focus groups. And then in terms of the location, I have had a conversation with Jan Geisler here at La Jolla. They have kindly offered to host, the focus group here in this area. And I know NASPA and her staff, you're located in a key area up in Pomo country. And I know Wendy Wrinkle and all of her awesome staff up on the coast, but in terms of location, I will be reaching out, and anyone who would like to host, that would be great. I plan to show a Star Wars movie at every one of our focus group meetings. I'm just kidding. But I mean, unless you want to, after everything's done, of course. But we can make it fun. We can have a potluck. We can, we will do things. We're not there just to, dip into the community, do some work, and then leave. We're there to, let you get to know us when we come to your area and ask questions. And so again, look forward to that. Are there any other questions about that in the chat that I might have missed, or anything that anyone wants to mention before I leave?
I don't see any, but I think we had some polling technical difficulties with also putting stuff in the documents in the chat. So Samuel, we were going to do this in the chat. Do you have his poll question that you can read, and then we'll ask folks to place that in there?
I can launch the poll now.
Oh,
I have it
okay.
ready to.
There we go.
Right.
So if this applies to you, go ahead and choose an answer to help Chegg move forward. Samuel, you can let me know when most people seem to have chosen an answer, and we can relay that to Chegg so that I can get us on a little break.
And then while we're finishing the poll, to finish my story on the veteran piece, it's important. The men that served in World War I in 1918, all the California Native people, they were not even US citizens, because Native people were not given the United States citizenship until 1924. So 6 years after World War I ended. And I share that because when we talk about capacity building, it's good to be mindful, like where our Native nations are coming from. Native people were not even citizens until 1924. And that's just on paper, right? That doesn't mean that all of a sudden there was social and cultural acceptance and like everybody was equal, right? It's taken decades for our communities, our Native people, to get to certain places to where we can benefit from, health partnerships and health funding. So I just like to share that. And anytime anybody in your communities want to talk about California Native veteran issues or history, I'm very happy to, take part in that or share what I've learned. It's important to put in context, not just the historical trauma, right, of the gold rush and the state-sponsored genocide that occurred and all of the structural challenges that Native people continue to face today. But it's also, that whole military side of things. And I don't glorify the military or war, but I come from families where we've had generations of Native men and women who have served honorably and sacrificed, and then suffer in terms of health because of that. And so I feel very obligated to always share that in anything that I do in terms of working with health capacity. So thank you very much. And I look forward to learning from every one of you over the next couple of days.
Chang, do you also mind sharing your email in the chat if folks have questions? Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, just by a little bit. I'm a personal trainer in my other job, so I'm going to break you early, and I recommend you stretch, you get up, you walk around, you get a drink of water before we tackle the next bit on community engagement. So I'm going to break you until about 11:40. That gives you plenty of time to hydrate, take a walk break, do what you need to do, and I will see you back here at 11:40. So I'm going to give folks a minute or two to come back. If your camera is off, you can just use the little thumbs up or something so we know that you're here. Perfect. And my dogs heard me talking and they started walking over here, so I had to close my door. All right. Our virtual world is funny. We've been doing it so long, when I say bye on a Zoom now, my dogs know and they come over, so. Okay. Samuel, do you think I should wait or you think I should get started?
You can get started, I think.
Okay. Well, right now we're gonna, right before lunch, before we break for lunch, we're gonna talk about developing relationships and working with your communities in tobacco control. So there's a couple of resources that go along with this portion of today. So Samuel will share those in the chat box for you to download. I think they'll also be emailed to you after, but a lot of what we're going to talk about today, there was also a corresponding CDC best practices guide for tribal communities. Some of this is in there. It's a handy reference, especially if you have new staff who are getting started in this work. But I am not the only one talking this time. I have a co-presenter, Christina, so I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then we'll get started.
Hello, my name is Christina Cruz, and I'm also a program consultant at CTCP, and then you'll hear my voice on half of these slides.
All righty. So I think she's also some of y'all's PC, but there's a lot of interactive components, at least as far as the chat box is concerned for this portion. So you've done an awesome job participating. I'll be asking again for that participation in the chat box to help you think through. I'm going to help give me some feedback on what is helpful in thinking through a lot of these community engagement components. So it's also helpful dialogue for our attendees and other individuals on the call who are not familiar working with tribal communities. So I just ask for your participation. Okay. So Christina is going to start us off. So I will hand it to her.
All right, community engagement and public health. The process of developing relationships that enable stakeholders to work together to address health-related issues and promote well-being to achieve positive health impact and outcomes from the World Health Organization. Community engagement is the backbone of our work. Community engagement is the process of developing relationships and enable stakeholders to work together to address health-related issues and promote well-being to achieve positive health impact and outcomes. We can't be successful without the support and with us supporting the communities that we live and work in. You're all engaged in this work on a daily basis. Because we come from so many different communities and walks of life, I want to pause right now and ask you to share in the chat box a few key words. What does community engagement look like in your work, in your community? Over the next few hours and days, we'll be hearing about the many wonderful ways we are engaged in the community and work. So take a few moments here and share whenever you're ready.
You could take a moment to think. Yeah, that's a big one. Use food to get them there and icebreakers to keep them engaged. Showing up. Cultural activities. Asking what the community needs and values. Collaborating with community partners. Using facilitation to encourage the most feedback. Building connections and trust. Have to go to people in the communities, not expecting them to come to us. Being present at meetings and events, showing support. Making sure everyone knows that they are valid and their voice will be heard regardless of age. Community engagement for our tribal community involves collaboration, content, connections, and just having fun. Yeah, that's right. Making events fun and joyful. Okay, so community engagement looks like a lot of different things.
All right, awesome. Now I know much of this will be what you already know, but given we have some new friends in the room and to frame our discussion later today, I'd like to reiterate key principles of community engagement, such as building trust within the community, accessibility or lack of its resources and healthcare services and etc. Sorry, those words are so difficult for me. How people see themselves in relations to the community engagement, models of engagement that create an impact that is valuable to community members, equity, transparency, and autonomy, empowering individuals and community at all levels. Enabling factors of successful community engagement, good governance, strong leadership, maybe from the top down in the community, decision-making, joint decision-making, communication, collaboration, and partnerships, resources to sustain community engagement. In the chat box, write what's helped you engage your communities in the work that you're doing.
All right, being present and available, having personal ties to the community. Food, youth, elder involvement, giveaways. spending time to listen to them before engaging in the topic. Being a frequent participant in community events, personal connections. Strong partnerships, communication, and aligning community goals with coalition goals. That's a good one. We'll talk a little bit more about aligning our goals later. Being accountable with follow-up. Yeah, so if we say we're going to do something, we follow through. Perfect. So there's a lot of things that can help engage your communities.
All right. Community engagement is the glue that links problems to health promotion actions. When we think about our work and our work plans, how do we mobilize and engage our communities to identify problems and issues that lead to healthier communities, healthier decisions, ultimately healthy promotion of actions? I totally understand that tobacco issues are not the forefront of many minds in our communities, particularly tribal communities that are also dealing with multifaceted issues that could be housing, substance abuse, historical trauma, and much more. But thinking about how to do tobacco issues that are important to us intersect and impact other areas of our community's health. For example, how do you explore partnerships with oral health, schools, tribal education, and more? Community work is not linear. The community work involves over time. How we can both be a part of our community's greater pursuit of health and wellness while also highlighting and addressing tobacco issues. In the chat box, write, what other issues does your community care about that intersect, overlap with tobacco prevention?
Mental health, safe and healthy communities, substance abuse and healthy lifestyle alternatives, environment and fire danger. I'm hearing that one a lot nowadays. Community events, community members' health, environmental impacts from waste. Youth and adult safety in the community and in the home environment. Income from retail and gaming. Resource sharing. So it sometimes helps to think about what are the broader and higher priorities that the community cares about that we can be a part of, that also includes our tobacco prevention work, traditional health and wellness, and then someone says substance abuse, breaking unhealthy cycles. These are all great. Okay, if you think of stuff, feel free to keep sharing that in the chat. I don't know if I missed it, Samuel, if you placed the CDC document in the chat box, but there will be resources available that go along with what we're talking about now with building relationships with tribal communities. There are some helpful examples and case studies, as well as some, basic information for folks who are familiar with tribal communities and some who are not, in that CDC document that they just released for best practices. So I don't think I need to cover a lot of this. You all know your communities well, but I just wanted to highlight some of these things in case we have new faces in the room. But understandably, there can be and still is deep distress in some Native communities. I'm Native Hawaiian, so even in where I'm from, that exists as well. So past history of unethical treatment by researchers, the government, both state and federal, historical trauma, and more, means when building and maintaining relationships in tribal communities, myself and we all need to be humble, be present, show up when we say we will, like some folks mentioned in the chat. And I've heard from some of you who may not be tribal, but you're working for a tribe. So it can be challenging for you to figure out how to build relationships with tribal leaders and decision makers to start building that trust and connection. So hopefully this will get some of the gears going to help you think through how to approach some of that. I encourage you to begin with the connections that you already have. I know I also have some local lead agency staff in the room today. You can think about asking Native organizations, clinics, etc. in your community to help identify leaders. But remember, it's also a two-way street. We're not just asking for things, we're also being a part of what they're also involved in and also extending our helping hand. Sometimes we come with many asks for our community and we get lost because we're looking at our scope of work and thinking about all the things we have to get done for our grant. But we should also try to find ways that we can contribute to what matters to our community. And I want to encourage any non-tribal grantees who may be on today to consider engaging in a meaningful relationship with the tribes in your area. There's a lot of good we can do together. There's also a lot of learning we also need to do. And I know you'll hear more real life examples tomorrow about this and Indigenous ways of knowing, but understanding that Indigenous ways of knowing differ from Western ways of knowing, which is one of the big takeaways I had in my first year in working on this. Much of what public health is built on those Western ways of knowing. At the Health Equity Summit, we've heard a lot about creating new systems, changing systems. So I bring this up because as a state program, we learn more every day from our tribal partners, and Indigenous ways of knowing are something that we should integrate into our community engagement, our public health work, and more. So in the chat box, I know many of you are doing this already. How have Indigenous ways of knowing impacted and or played a role in your tobacco work? Our community cares about breaking the cycle of substance abuse and teaching our children to be more independent, decolonizing tobacco control and prevention. I may have asked hard questions, so if you're just thinking, that's good too. Being familiar with how things work. We see the importance of collaborating with other tribes and sharing each other's resources to reach our goals. Be generous with one's time in listening and learning from stories. Do not rush. That's a good reminder for myself too. So I'm being mindful of this in the work that we're doing on the state level. Just wanted to place this in there as a general reminder for all of us. Asking for help from local knowledge keepers. Lead with building trust rather than jumping into policy change. It takes time. Being able to bring traditional teachings to the work. Awesome. And I'll make these slides available if folks want them. Okay. And then keeping our medicines clean and natural by growing it ourselves. Recognize the diversity of today's American Indian community as opposed to the old photos. I think that's what you meant. Yeah, there we go. Old photos. Storytelling and cultural presenters, which we'll hear from someone later this week. Okay. So thinking about who are the leaders in our communities. Tribal leaders consist of elders, tribal health coordinators, tribal council members, spiritual leaders, it could be youth leaders. Tribal leaders know their community the best. You can also ask Native organizations or clinics you're working with to identify their leaders. And those community champions, it's also helpful to identify who is important in that community that you're working in. In the chat box, if you can think of any other leaders in your community that are missing from this slide, I think if we're missing any, that would be helpful for folks in the room to get a good picture of kind of understanding better in their community about who may be a decision maker or a leader or who is important in a lot of our community's health. Okay, I'm seeing generational change can only be done with bridging elders and youth. The children, we don't just teach our children teach us too. Youth leaders, culture bearers. So this is also helpful when you're strategizing too and thinking about your own work and how it fits into the greater holistic picture of your community's overall health. And this slide, the information here can be found in that CDC document that Samuel shared. These are just some key resources I wanted to highlight. When I talked earlier this morning, mentioning getting onto listservs and sometimes seeing if there are additional funding opportunities to supplement your existing grants. Some of these will send out those notices in their weekly emails. I get them and I read through them. They're very helpful to see what's going on a national level. So you can go to National Native Network, some of the tribal epidemiology centers, and some tribal public health resources. So that document has the links to a lot of these places. And I highly recommend if you're not on those listservs or you aren't familiar to just look those up, because they will send out notices, and it's how it helps to stay informed, especially when they give updates. Sometimes there's virtual trainings that are helpful. So keeping in mind our resources as well. I know California is California, but it's good to also see what's happening across the nation. Yep, and Wendy says crib. I'm going to catch up on some of the comments from the last thing. So the animals, the earth, and the elements. Everyone has a role in the community, more so than, but even today. So I feel like everyone is a leader one way or another. Yes, I agree. That's a very important distinction. Okay, so I'm going to break this table down a little bit, but this table is also found in that CDC document. And I think it's a great summary of tribal partner roles in commercial tobacco prevention. It likely isn't an exhaustive list. You can probably think of other partners. But over the next few slides, Christina and I have broken this down to take a closer look at these types of partners, who they are, what their roles could be, how you can engage with them. These can be helpful at different stages in your work plan. For example, some of these partners, their roles may only come into play and you may only interact with them, let's say, after you implement policy or when you start your work. So we'll break down this a little bit more.
All right, the first one, technical assistance providers, which would be CTCP and CTCP state funded network. This will be covered later on today, and you'll hear from some of these partners over the next few days. Oh shoot, sorry. CTCP, California Tobacco Control Program, public health experts. And their jobs are to provide TA to the community members on how to implement commercial tobacco prevention strategies, collect surveillance and evaluation data. Then the communications and professionals, health communications specialists, local journalists, radio hosts, and media actors. They develop media campaigns and support traditional tobacco and discourage commercial tobacco. And they also promote cessation services. Businesses and oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was like, oh, I'm on mute. Okay, so businesses and organizations serving tribal communities. And I know some of you have worked with some of these partners already, but that could be businesses on or by tribal lands, businesses that are owned or operated by Native peoples. They can make their businesses smoke-free if they aren't already, or if they aren't mandated to be smoke-free yet. They can post cessation or other related service information for the community, provide cessation or employee wellness services to their employees. Maybe they have employees who want to quit smoking and that they need some help with some of those resources. But that's the role that they would play. And then community organizations or groups and cultural centers, you know, that may be community insight and strategies. They can help provide cessation resources to the wider community. They're oftentimes involved in media campaigns, designing them, further community reach. Sometimes if we think of some tribal health clinics, they will host a lot of resources as well, and they serve the wider community. And then collecting tribal specific health data, they may have a unique pulse on the community in terms of a broader picture on community health. So these are just some of the roles that they can play.
Health professionals. Examples would be tribal health board members, healthcare providers, or their staff. And they create smoke-free tribal health settings. They make health system change to integrate cessation into tribal health settings, and they align cessation with other health programs.
Tribal leaders, officials, elders, spiritual leaders. I know we had some conversations about who the leaders in our community are. But tribal elders and spiritual leaders will have cultural knowledge and wisdom, such as traditional tobacco experts, etc. They can help develop definitions of traditional tobacco in policies you may be working on. And I know I've seen this in some of your communities. Share teachings, reclaiming traditional tobacco, discouraging commercial tobacco use, which is some of what we'll hear about later on during this 3-day event, and helping to reclaim culture. You know, they can help educate youth coalitions, work closely with the youth, etc. As far as tribal leaders and officials go, that's tribal council, tribal department, leads, tribal education leaders, and more. But their role can be to build support in the community. They can help allocate resources if they're making those types of decisions. They are crucial to enacting commercial tobacco policies, because if they don't buy off on it, then things may not happen. But they also, in terms of retail, can play a role in monitoring commercial tobacco product sales. So there's different ways that these partners interface with the community and different ways that we would work with them and approach them. There's a couple more we're going to cover.
And really who we do everything for are the community members, Native youth, other members of the community, and we educate them about the benefits of smoke-free places, communicate with retailers about the harms of tobacco marketing and sales.
And lastly, tribal regulatory agencies and law enforcement. So oftentimes when folks think about working with these partners, a lot of it comes into play when the policy is getting adopted or implementation is happening. You may engage with them a little bit earlier, but examples could be gaming, financial, environmental authorities. It could be like a maintenance department that is in charge of installing smoke-free signage for a past policy that you are working on implementation for, but they can help define commercial tobacco restrictions, inform what the right enforcement approach looks like, and enforce smoke-free and commercial tobacco retail restrictions.
Creating shared goals and visions. Shared goals help with the community buy-in and respect the community's priorities. Tribal members and partners can play different roles in advancing and researching shared goals. In the chat box, what partners have you found valuable relationships within your work?
EPA departments, our Tribal Youth Education Center, elders groups, tribal chairperson and council members, housing director, education director, neighboring tribes, cultural leaders, and those members who want to help or who want help.
Create shared goals through consensus-based decision-making, such as work plans, priorities, tribal academy strategic charts, strategy charts, aka the Midwest Academy strategy chart activity. Ongoing decision-making discussion continues until everyone's most important needs are met. Consensus building by allowing many to have the chance to participate. In the chat box, write the consensus-based decision-making look like in your community. Where does it take place?
I want to add, somebody mentioned another partner as the substance abuse counselor. And I know in this group, we don't really call it a Midwest Academy strategy chart. That's what it says in your scope of work. Is that where your consensus-based decision-making takes place? Is it other places? Or does it look different? Yeah, NASBA, you're a pro now facilitating the tribal strategy chart. feedback from community needs assessments. It begins with the community, then it moves to the tribal leadership, so tribal council. Coalitions. Yeah, so this also may be where your evaluation comes into play, when you're learning and taking the pulse of the community. Key informant interviews, surveys. So it can look like a lot of things. We can get our information from a lot of places. We can get input from the community in a lot of different avenues. Tribal projects meetings, membership meetings, trainings to share data, tribal coalition partners. I know I learn a lot from these types of meetings. But just thinking about, where does this group decision-making really take place in your community, how to involve that in the work that you're doing, because you're already doing it. It's just identifying where.
Help the community and tribal leaders understand goals. This helps those who may not have experience in tobacco prevention to make informed decisions. Keep tribal leaders informed and involved in the work plans and plans to carry out the work. Transparency with the work plan engages participants and builds support. Sharing my work plan with the community. Outline roles and responsibilities of your staff, tribal leaders, coalitions, etc. Break down the goals of the work plan. Is it to engage the tobacco youth work, help individuals adopt smoke-free homes? Be clear about what is to be done with the data and personal information. What community norms and values will guide the work? Be transparent. Be present and as a part of the community. Maybe you're new or you have already a part of the community. Attend the social events. Think about short-term, intermediate, and long-term goals and timeline forecasting.
So some of this ties back to what we talked about earlier today, but then thinking about communicating with your audience and how to customize your messaging, your communications to fit your community. We have so many tribes in California. So I know all of you who are working or part of a California tribe are from very distinct communities that are definitely not the same. So you may need to customize how you outreach and how you communicate and message things with the community that you're working with. Many traditional tobacco control messages and strategies, as I've also learned the hard way, often don't resonate with tribal populations. So customization can help. I've seen all of you do this already. Still thinking about how can you adapt existing materials or create new ones to create communications that resonate with your community. What are the most popular ways that people get their news or that they hear about things? Is it TV, radio, print billboards, or is it at a central location? In the chat box, please share in your communities, what is the most common way people get their news and information? Is it TV? Is it radio? Is it print? Is it another avenue? A lot of people use social media, Spotify podcasts, Discord. I didn't think of those. Facebook, messages, native shows on radio, tribal offices. Oh, yep, the library. Social media, public transportation, community events, billboards, word of mouth, sharing social media posts, res radio, social media, newsletters, Instagram reels, social media platforms, flyers. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways that people get messaging. Putting flyers on everyone's doors, newsletters, mass emails and text messages from the tribal office. So thinking about what's the most effective strategy for communicating. Educational outreaches. These are all great. YouTube, newsletters, food distributions. I think I had one project a while ago. They had partnered with oral health and also food distribution, and they had put little flyers and stuff into those distributions to get information out. So these are all great. Takes a little bit of creativity sometimes. Postcards, drive-through events. Yeah. I think La Jolla, you guys do the trunk or treat, right, for Halloween, if that's right. So there are different events you can do and be involved in. Electronic display boards. So designing effective communications. You know, those campaigns by addressing serious health consequences of commercial tobacco use. That could be, you know, just with facts, it could be with graphic images, it could be personal stories from tribal leaders, elders, or youth. Sometimes those are pretty impactful. Respecting traditional tobacco use, and I see a lot of projects doing that, and a lot of projects also educating me, so I appreciate you for that. You know, we respect educating your communities about traditional tobacco use, and we're also learning as well. Reflecting your community's culture and encouraging quitting out of responsibility and respect for others, especially families. So maybe the youth want to create a group call to action in their homes or something along those lines. And sharing messages through popular media channels, you know, social gatherings, community spaces that are utilized by the wider community. And I think that's all the talking you're going to hear from me today. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. Later on, we're going to go over some applicable resources and other things that you can tap into that are related to community engagement. But always, if you're stuck, if you have specific questions, or if you need to give us any feedback, contact us or reach out to your program consultant. If there are questions, we can take those now. I know I'm like 15 minutes ahead of schedule, but I don't think people will complain about an early lunch either. So any questions for me or Christina? Going once, going twice. Okay. Samuel, do you think we should break early for lunch and then we can, what time should we come back, you think?
I think an hour is good. So
Okay.
1:25, just before 1:30.
Okay, so I will break you for lunch. We will see you back at, you said, why is my brain hurt so much? I can't do math. You said 1:25, right? Okay. Perfect. Enjoy your lunch, take your break, and we will see you back promptly at 1:25.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Jennifer. I'm also PC. My pronouns are she and hers. And as Hannah said, I will be talking about some of our funded technical assistance providers, as well as walking through our Partners in Otis website. I'm going to turn my camera off just to make sure things went smoothly. Don't have the best internet connection here, but let's get started. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. All right, can you see my screen all right?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, and like no notes or anything, just regular slides.
No, although that thing you have with the asterisk on the bottom of it is cut off a little bit, but I can see everything else, so it might not matter.
Oh, darn. Okay, I think that's the only little snippet. That just says slides courtesy of TCCC.
Okay,
Thank you.
you should be okay.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. So as I said, we will be going over our TA providers as well as statewide coordinating center. We'll do a partners walkthrough, an Otis walkthrough, and then if we have time at the end, I can answer some questions. But while I present, feel free to add any questions you may have in the chat box. So if you registered for this event, you should have received a handout for list of our statewide coordinating projects or statewide projects, and maybe one's going to appear in the chat box. Just a heads up, this is a comprehensive list of the statewide projects. In reality, there's going to be some projects you will work more with than others. There might even be projects you won't reach out to, but that's all right. I'm going to focus on a few that you will most likely work with the most. So on this slide, we have the Tribal Community Coordinating Center, Kick It California, California Youth Advocacy Network, Rover, the Tobacco Education Clearinghouse of California, the Tobacco Control Evaluation Center, and the Law and Policy Partnership to End the Commercial Tobacco Epidemic. There's a lot of acronyms, a lot of T's, a lot of C's, but we don't expect you to, know this all perfectly every single time. I for sure still get them mixed up, but I just want you to know that, no matter what you're working with or working on, you have support. All right, so while these logos are kind of scattered, I will be going through the projects in alphabetical order. So first off is the California Youth Advocacy Network, or CYAN. I know there's a lot of projects that are working on youth coalitions or really giving youth the opportunities to engage with your work, since they really are future leaders of your communities. So CYAN provides training and TA on engaging young people to advocate for tobacco-free communities, as well as direct support to youth and young adults dedicated to changing tobacco use norms across the state. So they changed the tobacco use culture in California schools by providing knowledge, skills, tools to create local change for healthier communities. So as you see in the slide, they offer things such as one-on-one support, staff and or coalition trainings. They can also help with the development of policy campaigns, presentation development, and materials development. They also host the Youth Quest annually. I know there are some projects who have sent youth to this event. And this event celebrates and promotes youth advocacy in tobacco control, and it gives them a chance to demonstrate their commitment to a tobacco-free California and learn about current tobacco control efforts, and letting them work with local legislators. All right. And next is Kick It California. They were formerly known as the California Smokers Helpline, but they are so much more than a helpline now. And as you adopt smoke-free policies in your community, it's also really important to support those interested in quitting smoking along the way. So Kick It California provides free services to people who want to quit smoking, vaping, or using chew. And it also provides support for people who want to help others quit. So in addition to being a helpline and having to standard telephone counseling, they also have counseling through text messaging and online chat through their mobile apps. They offer services through Amazon Alexa skills, which are the Stop Smoking Coach and Stop Vaping Coach. And they also have free educational resources such as the fact sheet, which is on display. And then the two photos in the bottom are screenshots from their app. And now we'll talk about the law and policy partnership to end the commercial tobacco epidemic. That can be a mouthful, so we can also call them the partnership. They're a joint initiative of the American Lung Association and the Public Health Law Center. They engage funded projects and local or tribal governments to develop laws and policies designed to end the tobacco epidemic in California. They bring together legal and policy expertise, TA and training to help projects, priority populations, local governments, and non-traditional partners to change or permanently eliminate the structural, political, and social dynamics that sustain the tobacco epidemic to end the tobacco epidemic. So they provide TA, research, training, analysis to help you pass strong tobacco policies that are effective and legally sound. So if you're maybe in the works of drafting a policy or thinking about policy adoption and conversations, or trying to envision what implementation might look like in your community, I highly recommend that you reach out to the partnership. And you can see some of the resources on the slide right here. They have some about smoke-free tribal housing and smoke and tobacco-free outdoor areas. Oh, and just a heads up, the handout actually has links to all of these projects to their website. So today's presentation is really a primer, but when you have the time, go ahead and go in depth. Oh, did I skip some slides? I didn't realize scrolling did that. All right, so next we have Rover. As someone who doesn't read as much as I still really like libraries, and Rover is no exception. So they provide library and information services, including reference, literature searches, citation services, and the circulation and dissemination of materials. So they can help find research studies, educational and advocacy materials, existing materials, and sample final evaluation reports, information on proposed interventions, relevant data and statistics. They also publish topical current awareness lists and bibliographies. They have a podcast series, which is really nice to listen to. And they're also really easy to get in contact with. You can contact them through their website, through phone, or even text. Like I know some people will maybe shoot them a text for some quick numbers and statistics during a meeting, and you'll look really smart while doing it. But they're a great resource, always happy to help. And next is the Tobacco Control Evaluation Center. So we're about to get into a lot of acronyms with T's and C's, I think. But the Tobacco Control Evaluation Center provides evaluation training and specialized evaluation technical assistance services to local tobacco prevention program evaluators and programs. They can help with writing evaluation activities, plans and methods, data collection, analysis, interpretation, visualization, and reporting, pretty much all things evaluation. One thing that's really helpful on their website is they have an evaluation guide you can look through. And they also have like a data collection instrument database. So if you're getting started on developing any kinds of surveys or other evaluation activities, going there is a good start for you to see some samples. They also maintain a evaluators community of practice called T. You can find more about it on their website. All right. And next is the Tobacco Education Clearinghouse of California, or TEC. They make and distribute education materials to support tobacco prevention initiatives. They can provide TA for educational material development and consumer testing. And in addition, they monitor existing tobacco-related educational materials to assess current needs for tobacco-related educational material development. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about them in a activity we have in a little bit. And last but not least, and I realize this is not ABC order, so I'm sorry. This is the Tribal Community Coordinating Center. Not that they needed an introduction, but they engage California tribes to assess their readiness and work in tobacco control. They coordinate tobacco control learning, communication, and policy activities. And they build the capacity of emerging tribal leaders to champion tobacco education activities. They are a wonderful, wonderful coordinating center. I'm sure many of you have worked with them. We're very happy to have them with us. So these are all of our TA providers that I went over today. And I hope you're paying attention because we're going to do a quick review activity. Like I said, just take whatever information you can. We have the resource for you to refer to, but let's get started. Let's see, is there an animation? There it is. All right. So for this quick activity, I'm going to show you some activities that you might find in your scope of work. What I want you to do is think of projects or resources that could be useful for you to reach out to. Instead of polling, I'll just have you type in a chat box who you think would be good to reach out to. For a lot of these activities, there's going to be more than one project you might want to reach out to. So let's go ahead and get started. The first activity is an educational materials development sort of activity. I will read out a little bit of it just in case. People have to listen in. I already see answers. All right, so develop 2 to 4 printed education materials to address the specific issues related to secondhand smoke and smoke-free housing. Target audiences will include tribal members, residents, and neighborhood groups. Develop in consultation with statewide grantees to adapt existing materials or develop new materials as appropriate. Once completed, market materials to appropriate audiences to facilitate distribution. Submit materials to the Tobacco Education Clearinghouse of California, or TEC, material submission page upon completion. So if you are working on these activities, or this activity specifically, who would be good to reach out to? I see Tech. Paula, you corrected yourself. I do that all the time, no worries. I see Tech and TCCC. Any other guesses? These look good so far, though. A few more seconds, making education materials. All right. Let's see, so I see Tech, TCCC, Rover. All right, so yeah, those were the T providers I was thinking about as well. Tech can help you develop materials, as well as TCCC can help you conceptualize how it might be. And then Rover is, our library of all the information. So nicely done. All right, next activity. Is it going? Let me click one more time. There we go. All right, this is a policy activity. So in collaboration with tribal members of a tribe and CTCP funded technical assistance providers, create a model policy that addresses smoke-free outdoor recreational facilities, venues, and areas, the improper disposal of tobacco product waste, and improve signage communication as a way to reduce the environmental impact of tobacco waste. All right, I'm seeing some answers in the chat box. Let's see, Rover, Public Health Law Center, LA. CA Clits. All right, any other thoughts? So if you have the same thoughts, feel free to put them in a chat box as well. Let's see, Public Health Law Center. All right, these were great answers. So I was, also considering Public Health Law Center, which is part of the partnership. Also maybe TCCC, the Rover, they might have some good resources too. All right, and then we have one more activity. This one's kind of has some freebie answers. If you read through it, this activity does tell you who you should reach out to. So this is an evaluation activity, which reads develop key employment interview questions in consultation with the Tobacco Control Evaluation Center and Tribal Community Coordinating Center. Conduct few telephone calls. I might have gotten to the important part of it. Let's see. These are some free points. Feel free to let me know who we should reach out to. So working on an evaluation activity. All right, there we go. We have TCEC and TCCC. Rover is always great to reach out to. TCCC. Yeah. All right, great. Advance to the next slide now. So that actually wraps up my portion for the TA providers. Next, we're going to talk about partners and Otis. So I'm going to close this slide and then share my screens for partners and Otis.
While Jennifer does that, Stacy answered one of the questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna read that one so everyone understands. The question was, when we make educational materials, do we have to put TCCC, the coordinating center, on them, or tech, the clearinghouse? No, when you create your own educational materials, you can utilize your own logo and your own branding. You don't need to put them on there. Those are just providers that can help you with creating content and graphic design. So thanks for answering that, Stacy.
Okay, thank you. I was told otherwise. That's why I was asking to make sure, because I wasn't sure.
Sorry you were told otherwise, but thanks.
If it is on the material, is that okay? Like,
Yeah,
if
I
it's
think
the
it's
website.
fine if it's on there. You just do not have to.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, good
If I
question.
Can
Oh, go
chime
ahead.
in really quickly, Tara. I think that a lot of people will utilize the Kick It California logo and information on their educational materials, depending on what you're creating. But if you're creating a cessation fact sheet, for example, you may want to include the Kick It information as a way to promote some of the cessation services that are available to folks in your community.
Okay, I had made a secondhand poster, said secondhand smoke poster, and I put the website on there because I was told to. So I don't know.
There is a portion of the policy manual that talks about funding attributions and what should be included on the educational materials. I'll provide the link in the chat for you so you could take a look at that specific section.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. Those are good questions. All right, so right now I will do a little walkthrough through partners. This is really our website with a lot of information and resources for you. You will primarily be navigating the website through this left-hand menu bar. There are things you can click on this side as well that we can take a look at. So first I will talk about the CTCP weekly updates. These include opportunities and updates about things such as meetings, calls, trainings, maybe webinars, like funding opportunities, things like that. And it's important that you do read these on a weekly basis just so you can stay up to date about what's been going on. You could access by clicking down there at the updates. You can scroll through. Would you look at this? Tribal Projects Meeting and Showcase Event Reminder. That is awesome. So it looks like that. So you can now access that from the home page. You can also access it from this sidebar right here with CTCC updates. And then if you have any updates that you would like to share, maybe you are hosting some kind of events, or maybe you developed, usually a bigger project might provide some kind of new resources, that would be here. You can click on that and there's just a kind of form you would fill in. Next in this section for CTCC updates is our Spotlight On. This is where we celebrate things big and small in our tobacco control work. And I want to kind of make sure that's clear because, you know, like success and celebration looks different. And also it's communities. So, you know, maybe for some projects, they're able to get policies adopted and that's great. And for other projects, you know, maybe they did something like they finally established some really successful partnerships and were able to host events and create activities, or like, yeah, like host events that really engage the community. And so I want to make it clear that we're not just celebrating like the endpoints, but also the journey in this section. Now I'm going to go down to resources and I'll highlight a few things here. On your own time, feel free to click around. Honestly, it's hard for you to break things on your end. I think it's impossible actually. So feel free to click around on your own time if you'd like. This is an InfoHub forum. If you participate in online forums, you know, maybe Reddit or something, that's kind of our version of it. So this is where you can discuss your work with other projects. It's a good place for asking questions and also sharing your expertise. I believe there is a topic thread for tribal projects, tribal partners right there. And another core feature about this InfoHub forum is if there's topics you want to be up to date with in terms of these conversations, you can just click subscribe. That's where I have that little check mark. And anytime someone posts something new, you will receive an email about it. So it's a good way to stay up to date. Next, we can take a peek at our media and communication section. This is where you can access all things media. So you can access their media library here, where they have a lot of their media campaign materials that you can use. You can also request technical assistance right here in this button. There are also other tabs here for you to visit, where they have more information about things like advertising, public relations, social media, other tools, media schedules, trainings, and you can also contact them right there. And then next, one thing I want to point out is this glossary. This is a great resource for anyone who's starting out and learning all the terminology in our field, or if you need a primer too. Another thing I like is sometimes there's terminology in here that maybe was commonly used before, but is not ideal to use anymore. And so there are also alternatives offered. You can export this as a PDF as well and maybe save on a computer or use it to send to maybe some partners you may have. And then another page that I think is helpful to look at is this COVID-19 page. You know, as things kind of ebb and flow, the pandemic, there's a lot of guidance and help on how to keep momentum going during COVID-19. So in your own time, this is an interesting read as well. And then next, we're going to scoot down to focus areas. So these different pages in the focus area section contain resources for various focus areas in commercial tobacco control. On these pages, you'll find things like fact sheets, guiding documents, and as such. So for example, this is the tobacco retail environment overview page. There's a lot of information here. And if you click on the sides, for example, like general TRL, there are resources that you can access through these links. So there's different areas, and I'm sure like more than a few of these are relevant to the work you're doing. And then next is our directory. So this is where you can go to find other projects or other members on partners. Some useful ones are these blue and green sheets. They're basically a comprehensive list of our funded projects, so whether it's competitive grantee or your local lead agency. And then the last bit I want to show you on partners is under this help section. This one part is website metrics. So some of you might have like a activity in your scope of work that where you have to submit maybe your login report. And this is where you would find it. So you go to help, website metrics, you'll click on that. And then you should be able to download whatever metrics you need. And then one last thing, so we sometimes get emails about having new staff members register for like Otis or Rover or partners accounts. There's details on this website right here, as well as a YouTube tutorial. Just a heads up, only project directors can request new accounts for both Otis, Rover, and partners. So that wraps up my bit for partners. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can also reach out to your PC. And I will switch over to Otis now. All right, Hannah, I see the clock's ticking, so I'll get us through this as fast as I can.
We have extra time. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you. And let me share Otis. All right, so for anyone who's new to this page, this is Otis, which is an online tobacco information system. This is where you do a lot of your project grant management. So I'm going to kind of split this walkthrough into two components. The first is really your project grant management component, and the second half will be resources. So I'm currently logged in as a program consultant, so my home screen and things might look a little bit different than yours, but they should be similar enough to where you can navigate where you need to go. So I'm actually going to go into like a project, for example, just so we can see some of the reports and whatnot.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, so as an applicant, your homepage will look relatively similar to this. And so a few things I want to show you is where to find your scope work and budget, a little bit on progress reporting, and a communication log. So there's several ways to access these things. I'm going to prioritize things in the report section first. So in this section, you can find your scope of work, your budget, and progress reports. And here's how you go about it. Ignore this cost part. That's kind of for LLAs. So I'm going to go to plan. If you go to the highest number version, that's going to be your most updated plan. So for some of you, you might be on version 4, version 5, whatever the highest number is, that is your most updated plan. So I'm going to go ahead and click that for this project. And so you'll see all sorts of different reports that you can download related to your plan. So you can have the background information, evaluator information, scope of work is right here, and budget information is right here. You can access them through either web. So if I were to click on that, a new window would pop up and it would list like an overview and intervention activities. If I click on the Word doc, it will download for me and I can open it up as a Word document, which the second way is great for if you're doing something like plan modifications. So if you go down, you can look at things. They're split up in different ways. You look at them by objective, you can compare them to other versions. For me, when I'm looking at a scope of work, personally, the easiest way is for me to just look at the combined scope of work, and I would just click on that, or the Word version. Either way, if you do web or Word, you can also find activities through like a keyword search pretty easily. And then same goes for budget. You can just click on like your budget justification, web or Word. Do keyword searches if you need to find anything specific. And so that's everything under the plan part of reports. Now for progress reports, we click here. So this project just started. So this is the first progress report. You will have like multiple periods on yours, perhaps. I can click on that, which is the latest date. And this will have all the information from that latest progress report. So when you completed yours, you completed these fields with the challenges and barriers and scope of work, additional activities, and then you can open it up here And then as you know, as PCs, we do look through your progress report and provide feedback through an analysis letter. And you would access that right here under analysis letter. And then same thing, you can do it through web or Word. All right, and then next is our communication log, which you'll find it tucked under here under this other section. You can click other, communication log. And this communication log is where we kind of track all our official communication, such as scope of work or budget revisions, or documenting important conversations, such as emails, phone calls, maybe Zoom calls, like out of time revisions, things like that. And the way that you start a message is that you click start a new discussion. If it loads, there we go. And then you will pick the topic. So let's say you want to do a revision request. There it is, revision request. You can choose who to reach out to. On these, usually by default, it'll go to the PC and the PM. And you can type subject message if it's a message. If we're documenting some kind of call or an email, we might add dates in here as well. And that's pretty much how you complete a communication log conversation. So I'll go back on those. And if you scroll through, they're usually broken up into these different subsections for reference. And that wraps up the project grant management section. And I can show you maybe one or two more things since I have a bit more time than I thought. You can also access your scope of work and budget stuff through this plan tab, and this will also show you the latest versions of your scope of work and your plan. Another thing to just keep in mind is with the contact information, if you have some staff turnover and you might have new project directors or new primary tobacco control contacts, please make sure those are up to date, just so we know who to reach out to if we need anything. With that being said, I think that wraps up the project grant management section. So now I'm going to jump into resources on Otis. So on top of this bar, you can access the Otis calendar right here. And this is where you'll find upcoming events such as like recurring calls or webinars or trainings. So as you can see, I clicked on the calendar. I can see what's happening right here. And scroll through. There's a lot happening. We have a tribal projects meeting, a showcase event on here. And that's great. And then if you want to add a new event, you can just click that right there. And then next is some parts in this right-hand side with training. So there's a lot. You can honestly click around on here. Like I said, it's really hard to break things on your end. Especially in Otis, you will get a lot of kind of checks before you do anything important. I know we did get questions about finding the policy manual, so this is where you can find it. So training, go down to policy manual and click it there. So our policy manual includes programmatic and administrative requirements, and also background information on California's tobacco education campaign, our mission, and our principles of strategic planning. This is a very important document to refer to, I'd say, but as while you're doing multiple things, your scope of work. I think Stacy even included a section of the policy manual, about educational materials. So this website's pretty easy if you want to look for anything. Looks like it's a long list. Sorry for the fast scrolling, but if you want to do like, educate, I should spell it right first. Education materials. This is the section that Stacy just sent us. And we'll have information about, what to do when you're developing education materials. If you're, want to learn about incentives, you also do Control F, incentives, use of CTC funds for incentives, and there we go, that's the chapter. You can download each chapter individually through a PDF export, or just through the whole, you can just download the whole policy manual as well. But just make sure you have it on hand and make sure you have the latest version. We just did our update last month. That should be good for the next year or two. But yeah, make sure you have this on hand. It's nice to refer to and make sure your new staff has it. And then I think one last thing I'll show you on here is training and progress reports. We often get questions about progress reports. Happy to answer them, of course, but if you want additional support, we have these e-tutorials on how to complete the progress reports with each section. Feel free to click through whatever section you're interested in learning more about, and you can learn how to complete them there. I think that wraps up my presentation, but are there any questions I can help answer? I know it's a lot of information and a lot of stuff on our pages. Like I said, feel free to click around. If there's anything you ever need help finding, feel free to reach out to your PC or your PM, and we'll be happy to help out.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad you did the demo and not me.
I'm glad too.
All
Okay,
right.
well, thank you.
Yep. Let's see. I do see one question. If we put our funding source in educational materials, do we also put the funding source on presentations? I do not know this answer off the top of my head, so I'm going to defer to someone on my team.
I think it could be helpful to include it on presentations. The formal attribution statement that's included in the policy manual is pretty long. So you can always just put a very brief snippet on the first slide of your presentation that says, you know, this project is funded through CDPH, CTCP, or something like that. I think there's a couple of variations and examples in the policy manual. You could kind of use that as your guide.
Valerie, I think you have your hand up, right?
No, that was a mistake. Sorry, I'm trying to put the
No
hand
worries.
down. My bad.
Oh, just want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. All right. Any other questions? All right, well, you know where to find us. The last bit for today is budgets. So I'm going to hand it over to Jameson, who's going to cover a lot of information about budgets that should be helpful for you.
Cool, sounds good. By popular demand, it is budget time. Exciting, exciting. Can everybody see my slides okay? Looking good?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Just to dovetail with Jennifer, what Jennifer was saying, she went over a lot of the tools that I mentioned in this webinar, such as Otis, where to find your budget and things like that. So her presentation has a lot of synergy with this one, and we kind of end up in a similar place. But welcome to the CTCP Budget Resources webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to give everyone here a brief overview of the budget areas and what funds can be used for what purposes. I know these things can be a little confusing, but I'm hoping the webinar and the tools within the slides can provide some understanding, and we will have time for questions at the end. So if you have any great questions, just write them down and you can put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them. With that in mind, let's get started. First, I'm going to provide a little introduction about myself. I'm Jameson Mitchell. I'm a procurement manager here at CTCP, and I'll be sharing with you some information about budgeting. I'll have links to resources at the end, and I can give out this PowerPoint presentation as needed. There'll be time for questions at the end once again. And I know it's after lunch, so I'll try and keep my talking to just the necessary information. And please note that not every slide may apply to your grant. Every grant is a little bit different in what they need and what they provide. So moving on into the budget tools that I'm going to discuss, the first budget tool is the appendix within the specific RFA that you applied to. These slides do contain a bunch of information, I'll warn you now. So I'm going to try and emphasize the key points and give you some pauses to digest the information occasionally. So a great place to start learning about the budget process at CTCP is looking over the budget justification instructions inside of the RFA that you applied for. This outlines the expectations and abilities of the CTCP budget as it pertains to your project. Every RFA has a budget justification instructions appendix. The last page of the appendix lists budget tools to help promote community engagement, which is part of what we'll be going over today. Your PC and PM are always available to answer any technical assistance questions you may have about these tools. So let's take a look at some of the specific budget tools that you can also use and how they are paid by CTCP, starting with stipends and volunteers. Stipends are a great way to encourage community engagement. They can be offered to volunteers at the end of an internship, to community members for creating certain materials, or to community leaders and volunteers that dedicate their time to attend meetings and support scope of work activities. It's important to keep in mind that stipends can't be tied directly to productivity like number of hours worked, but they can be used to offset out-of-pocket expenses of volunteers like travel and parking costs. So to dive further into volunteers and stipends and illustrate some of the rules about them, stipends are paid to volunteers who serve the agency. They can't be paid to another agency or organization, and they're not incentives. We'll talk about incentives later. It's a really important topic, and I'll cover it in some detail, but these are not incentives. They're paid to cover out-of-pocket expenses for individual volunteering general help to the agency. But because they're not incentives, you're also not bound to the $50 per person per year policy like the incentives are. If the stipend, though, goes over $600, it does need to be reported on your 1099 as taxable income. When it comes to our policies surrounding stipends, we're bound by the U.S. Department of Labor. Volunteers receive no compensation for their volunteer work, but they can be paid for expenses like travel expenses. And they could also be paid for like a nominal fee. Many tribes have been using stipends for speakers at events. Continuing on the subject of volunteers. To define a volunteer in our terms, it means an individual who performs service with no expectation of compensation. And this could be a number of things, but the general guidelines are that they provide a service that's less than full-time, and they don't displace a regular employee doing the same type of service. You can also reimburse their travel and reimburse other expenses. So that's kind of all I have about volunteers. And moving on, we're going to talk about a pretty hot topic in CTCP budget terms, the use and rules about incentives. Here you see, the two types of incentives I'm going to get into. A woman with a gift certificate or a merchandise card, as we refer to them in budget terms, and people enjoying some food. And these are kind of the two main types of incentives that I'm going to discuss and how to use and implement them. They're a great way to encourage positive behavior and can be used to boost engagement. And in the coming slides, I'll identify the different types and provide a little bit more of detail about them. There are a few basic rules when it comes to incentives, and I'll cover those now. So let's get started. On this slide, we talk about the definition and requirements of incentives. On the left, we define incentives, and on the right, we have the requirements for incentives. The definition of incentives. Basically, incentives are supposed to motivate or reinforce a positive behavior, participation, or involvement. Incentives should include healthy or educational items such as merchandise cards for books, music, healthy food outlets, creativity, etc. And they are limited to $50 per person per year for consumable and $50 per person per fiscal year for non-consumable. And again, it does require an action or involvement of the participant in some sort of tobacco-related behavior modification. The requirements for the incentive begin with the idea that, first of all, again, an action is required. And when you request use of incentives, think about what the recipient should do to receive said incentives. And also the scale of the incentives. You can incentivize a smaller activity for less than $50, and you can incentivize a larger activity for the full $50. The use of incentives are limited by California Department of Public Health, and incentive activities are approved on a case-by-case basis by CTCP. There are two main types of incentives that I'll cover on the next slide: consumable and non-consumable. And it's really important to remember that distinction because they're kept separately for our terms. So here are some examples of consumable and non-consumable incentives in very basic terms that I think everyone can understand. Once someone has participated in an anti-tobacco behavior of some type, they can now receive an incentive from these two columns. The reason that there are two columns is because consumable and non-consumable incentives are tracked separately. On the left, we have some examples of consumable incentives like food and beverage. And on the right, we have non-consumable incentives such as merchandise cards and awards. Food is a great way to incentivize event attendance, and merchandise cards are a great way to incentivize participation in activities such as cleanup events or, a permanent large-scale behavior modification. So here are the basic rules about incentives. They must be logged, who receives what and when, so you don't duplicate efforts or go above the $50 threshold per person per year. And they must be logged separately, consumable and non-consumable, so they don't overlap and exceed that threshold. And finally, incentives cannot constitute swag, which I understand is kind of a sticking point, but swag is firmly prohibited under CTCP directives, and it stands for stuff we all get, and we cannot fund it, unfortunately. So to cover a little bit about swag, I'm going to move on to the next slide and define what that is. Moving into swag, you can see on the right some identified items, a keychain, a coffee mug, basically things that are generally distributed to promote certain brandings. If you've gone to a health fair, they're out at a lot of booths, pins, things like that have particular brandings on them. And they're a main restriction when it comes to incentives. As a PM, I'm responsible to ask questions about what type of incentives people want to buy, because we want to make sure the incentive item does not fall into the swag category. As you see, there's examples of water bottles and keychains, but the program letter 1801 gives a much larger list on what can be excluded from budgets as swag. It includes keychains, coffee mugs, water bottles, lunch boxes, pens, pencils, pocket calculators, stress balls, a lot of things, like the whole gamut of booth giveaways. These are essentially deemed wasteful by the state, and we cannot fund them. But that being said, there are some blurred lines between swag and incentives. So I would definitely refer to program letter 1801 to clarify any differences between the two. Moving on, I'm going to cover events. On this slide is a chart displaying some approvable costs regarding hosting and attending events, things that CTCP does pay for. For hosting events, we cover incentives, speaker fees, hosting costs, educational materials, space, things of that nature, and they go under the other costs line. For attending events, we cover registration, travel, per diem, as well as attendance for coalition members. For attending events, the travel and training section within the budget is usually used. It's important that projects consider building in travel and training expenses into their budgets for volunteers and community members, as well as their own staff. Again, reach out to your assigned PM and PC to discuss appropriate incentive use, educational materials, and event attendance. Continuing on events. Event planning should be pre-approved per the individual grant. If you'd like to participate in events, ensure that it's relevant to the scope of work outlined in your grant, and that it supports objectives that are key to completing the work. If you believe an event would support outlined objectives from your plan, but you don't have it currently in your budget, then a revision to your budget and potentially to the scope of work as well may be required. If it's not a pre-approved event, then a revision will be required. Please consult with your PM or PC if you'd like to attend any non-pre-approved events, and we'd generally love to work with you and make that facilitated and make it happen. But it does take a little bit of heads up on your part, and we'd love to work with you. Moving on to our next subject, training, and travel. As mentioned in the last slide, training is a great way to engage the community, but regarding the budget rules regarding training, you can get travel costs reimbursed as long as the training is related to your project and scope of work. Volunteers can get reimbursed for travel costs, including mileage for attending trainings. And you'll find multiple types of trainings listed in your budget: project travel training, required travel and training, as well as CTCP required travel and training. If you have any questions about these subjects and how they interact with one another within your budget, please contact your PC or PM, and we would love to help you with that issue. Also, for specific rates on travel reimbursement, refer to the CalHR rates that are at the bottom of this slide, and they'll give you the current information on what the going rates for lodging and things like that are. Next, we'll show how to produce educational materials and use them within the CTCP policy. Educational materials are a great way to promote engagement as well as provide useful information about tobacco use and cessation, among other subjects. Examples include pamphlets, signs, quick kits, and more. Please check with your assigned PC or PM to discuss appropriate educational materials if you do not have pre-approved educational materials in your budget or scope of work. CTCP will support educational materials that are pre-approved or revised into budgets as long as the subject matter is relevant to the scope of work that's in place. It's advised also to work with the Tobacco Education Clearinghouse of California, as mentioned in the previous presentation, or TEC, to develop or order materials, as they will have appropriate messaging. CTCP approval is required before purchasing, so please reach out to your PM or PC to discuss more. Now I'll provide some more examples of educational materials. Here's some examples that have been produced by TEC. TEC is a great resource for development of educational materials. And here are some examples produced by some of our tribal funded grantees. I'll go through some more and the appropriate messaging so you can see, and then you can also use some resource links at the end of this presentation for your grant. On the left, we have a postcard, and on the right, we have an educational sticker that can be placed upon water bottles and things of that nature. We just unfortunately cannot fund the water bottle itself. Another great example of educational materials are quick kits. Here's an example of literature that accompanies a quick kit from Nevada County Public Health. Quick kits are a great way to engage and educate, as well as provide resources to people hoping to quit tobacco use. On the left are some educational materials from the TEC catalog, and on the right is an example of an educational fan also produced by TEC. The TEC digital catalog and technical assistance catalog provide a great amount of resources for any grantee hoping to develop or select educational materials to distribute. The content is approvable per CTCP standards and has tobacco messaging that works in line with many approved scopes of work. The TEC digital catalog or technical assistance portfolio are available at these links, and I can provide this PowerPoint if necessary. The main thing with the educational materials is just ensuring that the tobacco messaging is there and kind of consistent with what's outlined in your scope of work and outlined also as approvable messaging. So TEC kind of hammers both of those at the same time and makes sure that it works on all fronts for our purposes. Moving on to sponsorships, another budget category. These are really useful if your community is holding a health fair, street fair, or festival. A paid sponsorship can be used to promote pro-health, anti-tobacco messaging for these purposes. Paid sponsorships go under the other costs category in the budget and also come with their own set of rules. They must be pre-approved or revised into a budget and cannot be performed without prior approval. TV, radio, print, digital, social media, and signage are all acceptable forms of sponsorship. Ensure that any sponsorships comply with the admin and policy manuals, which I'll touch on how to find later, so that CTCP can reimburse these costs. Next, we will go into the revision process a bit to discuss how to modify CTCP grants. Overall, grantees should spend with their agreed upon budget until CTCP has approved any changes, but changes do happen. Pre-approved budgets aren't locked into place, and sometimes things need to shift so that work can get done. For this purpose, we have the revision process, which is handled through Otis, CTCP's online service for grantees and employees as well. For example, COVID changed a lot of rent and staffing needs for many grantees and eliminated or reduced rent costs for some. That freed up money to be used towards other areas of the budget. So if you'd like to change your budget, the budget revision process is the way to do it. To create a budget revision, inform your PM that you'd like to change your budget and then let them know what you'd like to change, and you can work together from there. It's best to revise your budget one fiscal year at a time. So try to remember every change you'd like to make and then submit them all together so they can be evaluated. Let your PM know if you'd like to make a revision, and the open revision period is February 1st through March 31st. Moving on, I'll cover some resources that are great tools to help with CTCP budgets. This slide is a list of some valuable resources that inform CTCP budget decision-making. Both the admin manual, the policy manual inform what is fundable and what is not. These two manuals are highly useful tools and both are available in Otis under the training section. Pulling up the policy and admin manuals and doing a quick search for whatever term you're interested in is a great way to find out if something can be funded with the grant. Jennifer actually did a great example of this in her presentation. We have several other resources that can help grantees navigate their budget, including e-tutorials, which have videos on how to set up your grant, submit documentation, as well as create and modify line item budgets within Otis. Otis also contains your approved budget, which lays out what you are able to spend money on. Please refer to your approved budget in Otis to evaluate what your program can spend money on. So this slide has a lot of great resources in it. The admin and policy manual are great to refer to as just reference material, and they can really, really be informative when it comes to game planning what you'd like to spend money on. And with that, I will conclude my speaking part and get into the questions. So myself, Adam, and Andreas are here to answer any questions from the audience. If you have a budget-related question, just type it into the chat box, and we will do our best to answer.
I think there was the one question about T-shirts and incentives that Andreas responded to. If you just want to verbalize that, I think we can get started with the questions that way.
So as Andres mentioned, T-shirts are treated as incentives and are included in the $50 per person per year rule and must be tracked as an incentive would be tracked. They are definitely in the gray area, but are approvable costs when it comes to gray area between swag and incentives. Are there any other questions on the budget?
I know I've had some projects asked in the past in regards to travel. Some of our projects have really large counties and spans that they are trying to get either tribal council to attend to their meetings or individuals to attend for their cessation programs. And there's been asks in regards to being able to provide them reimbursement for their travel or given them a stipend or a gift card. And so if that's possible.
So the question is if people can be reimbursed for volunteers?
Yeah, for anyone attending a meeting that's long distance or attending like a service that they're providing.
I believe those costs are reimbursable, but I'll defer to Adam.
Yeah, so one of the line items in your travel section would be project travel training. This is any costs that go to support your scope of work activities in regard to training or the travel to get to scope of work events. So you could build it in there. Or as Jameson mentioned, you could do a stipend. Again, stipends are to cover out-of-pocket expenses to help complete scope of work events. So if you do have some flexibility in your budget and you are able to provide that, that is certainly something that we could approve. Like anything, if it's not already in your budget, reach out to your procurement manager and let's just make sure that we get it approved in the budget prior to any spending.
Thank you, Adam. I know that's just a question we've had in the past from other projects.
So for our budget, all we have seen for stipends is for the Youth Quest event that we are going to be hosting. If we had a different event other than that, you know, like maybe recruitment that somebody was helping something with, could we take from that? And yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe allocate the funds and then put it into that other cost section.
What? I don't know. I missed that comment. Who said that?
Okay, so it's basically if you have a stipend for one event, can you just use it for another event? I believe each one has to be approved on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, to add to that, to the stipends, you want to just have them be related to an activity in your scope of work. So once that's identified, then it could be, we can review and approve.
And then I think I had one other question from a project that asked if, but I think Jameson, you already covered this during the presentation, but it'd be nice to reiterate. If a project happens to accidentally overspend on a line item and they're just noticing it, when can they request a budget revision, or do they need to wait for a specific time?
Yeah, I can handle this question too. Do everything in your power to not spend outside of your budget, because in some cases we just can't reimburse for certain things. So again, that's why we've stressed often in the presentation to make sure to check your budget for spending, and then if you need to make a change, reach out to your assigned procurement manager. The revision period, the open revision period, is in February and March every year. But let's say you need to make a change in between that time, you would just reach out to your assigned PM and PC through the Otis comm log, and we can verbally approve it and then fix your budget during the revision period, or approve it in writing, basically.
And then I did have a question as well, if speaker fee honorariums or honorariums are allowable to be included in their budget to support project hosted events.
Yes, but I would also reach out to your procurement manager and PC on this one too, just to make sure that it's appropriate use of funds and the amount is appropriate. Obviously, you know, there are some speakers out there that command a really high speaker fee, and that might not be the best use of your funds. So we'd want to just discuss that and see if we can find alternatives if that's the case. But it is an allowable expense as long as it's supporting the scope and your and you have it in your budget. So
Great. I think that was all the questions that I saw come in for that. I don't know if anybody else have any other questions.
Yeah, if anybody has questions, they don't want to speak, you feel free to type it in the chat. But yeah, we'll be here next couple of minutes just to answer any questions. And if not, if your question does not get answered, definitely feel free to reach out to your assigned procurement manager or program consultant. That way we can provide that technical assistance and answer the questions you might have. So don't be shy. We'll be here. We're here to help you guys.
And thank you, Andres, for answering one of the questions that was lastly implemented in the chat, and I'll just read it out loud for sake of others. If our project were to implement a stipend or for specific things such as a forum activity, would that be taken out of the travel line of the budget? And the response is it would need to be budgeted under the stipends and other cost sections of the budget.
I have a question that was messaged to me. So for trainings that relate directly to the scope of work, do projects have to get prior approval for that particular training? If it relates back to the scope.
Depends on if there's a cost, right? Some of these now are virtual and there may not be a cost. So that, you know, we wouldn't really have a problem there. If there's cost to attend the training and it's not already in your approved budget in Otis, yes, please reach out and we will help you find a way to shift funds to cover that expense.
Another question just came in. Would our budget ever be increased?
Great question. So obviously our funding, you know, over time we expect it to go down as we do a great job and continue to make California tobacco free and our communities tobacco free. What we do try to commit to is to try and keep our contracts whole, meaning like as is, so no reductions there in the current contract period. Unfortunately, there's just too many factors to say, like, you know, if we would ever decrease budgets or increase budgets, there's just too many things outside of our control. But we do our best to keep the contracts as is, as whole. Hope that helped answer that question.
So follow-up question I had, because earlier today I covered capacity building and, like, let's say staff need training and they want to attend a virtual thing for like facilitator skills because they do a lot of that in their scope of work. The question was a follow-up for that training question. If they don't have that allocated in their budget for that specific, let's say, facilitator skill building training, but they have money in a line item they want to use for it, would they request a revision for approval before that?
Yeah, reach out, you know, to your procurement manager and PC in the comm log and just say what you want to do, and then we will help you figure out what needs to change in the budget.
Got another question. Will incentive amount ever be increased? With the increase of cost, it seems to me that $50 a year is pretty low.
Yeah, this is tough. So we would have to, it involves the Office of Legal Services, it involves the Department of Public Health, and they're very against incentives in general, just because it's kind of like a gift of public funds, which is a big no-no with taxpayer money. So it does, I know $50 can seem low at times, but we're a little hesitant to poke them on that because, you know, they might take it away completely. We've fought many times over the years to keep it. It's been challenged numerous times to even having incentives. So the answer is, I don't know if it'll ever be increased. It's one of those things that we kind of just try not to poke people on and just leave it as is because we don't want it taken away. So. But you can get creative. Again, like we mentioned, it's $50 for consumable incentives and $50 for non-consumable incentives. So, you know, you can use food in some cases where you might not have money for a merchandise card, and vice versa. Or you can create, you can think about maybe having an activity where they do a little bit more for you to support the scope of work, and then you can do a stipend to reimburse out-of-pocket expenses for that work.
I had a question.
Sure.
It might be like super specific, but so in our budget for this fiscal year in our other costs section, we actually had a part of our budget dedicated to this Native Youth Regional Summit that we're supposed to develop. And just in our county, because we're in Mendocino County, there's like 4 other neighboring tribes who also have gotten the CTCP grant, and I haven't really communicated with them like directly yet to see if they also had this within their budget for this year for their own like Native Youth Regional Summit. But they basically gave us like $5,000 to hold a youth summit for the local youth around here. And one of the questions I had was like, since we have like $5,000 to use for that, if other tribes had the same thing, would there be a way that we can all kind of combine together to make one like super big thing instead of like 4 smaller individual ones? And if we did, like, how would we itemize that? Would we have like each tribe do specific things? Because in the budget itself, it has like so much for the food, so much for like, if we were to have like people like public speakers come or like some musicians come or something like that, and people transportation so that they can drive there and stuff. But it's like, we'll be able to like combine it with other people, say if they did have the same thing within their other cost section.
There's probably not any budget rules that are affected by this, but there may be some scope of work considerations to think about. Hannah, is there a way you guys handle this? Hannah, so.
I'm not a PC for most of the Mendocino tribes. I don't know who is. But I know that when they were talking initially about these youth summits, they were going to take turns hosting them. So I don't know if that's still the plan for some of them.
Yeah, that was my understanding, that they're rotating in regards to who would be hosting them.
So initially it was supposed to be like each year a different tribe or a different project would host the event, and then it would just like, stagger to a different location each year or something like that.
Yeah, and that was really also done in order to best make it easy in regards to who can go ahead and claim for certain activities in their scope of work as well. But it would still be a collaborative effort, but the host of the event would be the one that, for that event in particular, that would be able to claim and report on the specific activities done for that.
So whoever hosted can claim the tracking measures for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think the tribes in the San Diego area that are funded do exactly that. If I'm correct, I think they take turns hosting and hosting that event.
Okay.
I think that's the plan. If things change, you can let us know, and we can try to figure it out with you.
Yeah, because I was just curious because I know that with the impact of like COVID and everything being shut down for the last couple of years, I really don't know if we've held one yet. So if neighboring tribes had it in their budget to host it like the first or the second year, and it's understandable because of everything being shut down, I didn't know if that was something that can roll over and just like make one larger event since everything is beginning to open up now, or if it's not available anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I would also maybe think about if you're not going to spend that, are there other areas that you could maybe think about utilizing that money, right, Adam?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, the main thing I was thinking about was the who gets credit for the tracking measure. So that can be a little tricky once these kind of big events kind of happen. So it would definitely be worth a conversation with your team and our team. Make sure that we get all that worked out before we move forward or something like that.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to figure out how to mitigate those waters.
Good question.
got another question in the chat. What is the policy for rollover funds?
We don't roll over funds for grantees, so you have a budget per fiscal year, and that's the budget for that fiscal year. There were some exceptions made when some grants started, just because we had to get people up to speed, and we want you to be successful. And then also there were some trainings, obviously, that required trainings that were budgeted, and it didn't make any sense to leave the money sitting behind there. But typically for grants, there's no rollover.
I did get one other question sent to me when we were talking a little bit earlier about incentives. When purchasing gift cards for incentives, are there limitations to the type of gift card that we can purchase and use? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, there are limitations to the different types of gift cards that can be used. And I would definitely advise them to reach out to their assigned procurement manager if they're having trouble identifying different types of gift cards that they would like to use, or merchandise cards as we refer to them in budget terms. Obviously, nothing that can be used to purchase tobacco or tobacco-related items, alcohol, unhealthy foods are generally frowned upon. Good things are like bookstores, Starbucks. Starbucks and books are generally regarded as both very safe options. And there are a few other vendors that have options that are generally safe, such as Apple Music, things of that nature. And if that particular grantee needs more ideas for merchandise cards, they can reach out to their assigned procurement manager.
All righty, we have until 3, so if there's any lingering questions.
Yeah, thank you for all the good questions. Also, Adam, in the chat, he linked one of our budget justification instructions. On that budget justification instructions has a lot of a wealth of information as far as the for incentives, stipends, and other budget terms that we use and what's allowed. So definitely feel free to download that and save that. It's definitely a great tool to use when you have questions. And then also anytime you don't have, there's a great question that you can't answer based on some of the information we have, definitely reach out to us because every question is definitely unique.
Somebody's asked if we could put the budget justification instructions in the chat again. And Stephanie said the budget justification link won't open. So once I stop sharing screen, I can put a new one in there.
You can stop sharing screen if you want, and then if you have any other questions, we'll get to those. But I think we can start with closing comments until you get that one in there. So I want to thank everyone for your attention today. It was a very long day. I hope some of this context and some of the stuff we covered was helpful or a friendly reminder. And day 2 is tomorrow. So I'm excited for day 2 and to hear from many of you, but I'm going to pass it to Samuel and Ravina to maybe make any other closing comments they have since they're the ones running day 2. So.
Thank you, Hannah. It was great presentations today. Yeah, we're looking forward to day 2 tomorrow. We have the Tribal Projects Showcase event, which is where they've all developed their presentations to share with all of you. And so they're short presentations, anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes long. And that will take up most of the day. We also have a couple of other presentations. We have the Public Health Law Center, and we have sent the agendas out by email. So hopefully you can join us.
And tomorrow the time is the same, right? 10 a.m.
It's the same time. The only thing that's different on the agenda is the lunch time, which ours is 12 to 12:45. And I saw that yours was a little shifted a little bit.
We shifted it a little.
Okay.
Yeah. And then do they use the
Yeah,
same
same Zoom link for day 2 as today, and then day 3 is the one that's different that you should have by email.
Okay, well, if you want to hang around just for us to get that budget justification in the chat, I don't have anything else. Thank you. I appreciate all of you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.